Hello everyone, and welcome back to Fleet's Random Ramblings. I hope you're all having a fantastic time. I know I absolutely am. And we're back once again for what I hope to be an enjoyable Monday evening. As it so often normally is. Although, occasionally we can have minor problems at times, but most of the time we muddle through as best we can, as you all know. So it's nice. Hello, Stephen Mayer on YouTube. It's a nice warm day here, as it has been over the last few weeks, and we have a new mic here on the channel. So if you guys do want to let me know how that sounds, please do. I'm more than happy to actually be told how it sounds, because that lets me know, well, how it sounds. Because I've not done a ramblings with it before, so being told how it sounds would be very, very helpful. Right. So, without further ado, let me notify the people. Well, first things first, let's go live on the old Discord server. And then we will send out, if it'll let me do it. There we go. And then I will send out a thing, and I will also link the ramblings zone in there, because that's people who want to find me on the Discord should be able to find me. There we go. Right, okay, so that should now work as I expect it to. So, without further ado, and everything being the way I would expect it to be, let's get cracking. So everything else is alright. So I should be able to, if I just very quickly come in here and go... I think it's, if I remember correctly, and I do... Yes, I do. Just thought I'd check. Good, okay, everything sounds good. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, as per usual, we'll dig into the Patreon questions first, because those do have priority. Friendly reminder that the Patreon is linked in the video description. So, if you would like your question read out first, please feel free to, well, what's the word? To walk on down to Patreon and become a supporter. If you become a Fleet's Fantastic Funder, you get a Discord role, and if you become a Fleet's Superb supporter, you get one question a week, answered for everyone else's. And Timu Locker asks, what are the panel's favourite holiday destinations in the British Isles? Well, seeing as it's just me, I don't really holiday in the British Isles. So... I don't really holiday much at all, to be fair. If you want my honest answer to that. First holiday, quote-unquote, I took was actually this year when I went out to see Dr. Clark. And even then, that wasn't as much a holiday as much as a weekend trip away. If I holiday, I'm usually overseas. Tim Gunner Officer asks, Guten Tag, question 1. What if Japan somehow won the Battle of Kanking Gold? Does this make the Japanese even more confident in trying to attack the Soviets, or even invade and take Mongolia in the future? Well, it'll definitely make the Japanese confident in their abilities to engage in ground warfare against a peer opponent, but the logistics of invading Russia were becoming brutally apparent to the army. There's a reason why the Navy wins the debate. There is a little bit of underhandedness, but the Army is also well aware of what they're trying to do. And they sort of let the Navy win the debate over which expansion doctrine is going to succeed, partially on the grounds that fighting in Mongolia and up the Trans-Siberian is going to be hell, even at the best of times. And all of the logistical cards are going to be in the Russians' favor. Especially if you try and invade Mongolia, that's just hell. So I don't think it changes the outcome for that particular strand of history. So next one is a question from... That's right, the bot's not working. Who has pinged me? Steve, that's not where you put questions. You don't need to ping me. That's not how you put questions. That's not where you put questions, Steve. They go in rambling text with a yellow reaction below them. And you don't have to ping me. Could you please repost that in Ramblings text, please? Thank you. I did ping the server, and they also sent out the stream announcement ping. There should be no excuse. Steve, again, you don't need to ping me. You don't need to ping me. I am reading the things. You don't need to ping me. Okay, first things first, before we get to Steve's question, we've got to get through some of the questions on YouTube. So, Knight has one for Dragon, but Dragon is not here right now. So, one for Stephen Mayer. How much additional force experimental weapons would it take to disable Malta as a port or airbase during World War II? And where would the forces come from? How would this affect North Africa, Europe, and Asia? The Italians and the Germans had a plan drawn up for a joint parachute/naval landing on Malta. They had a plan for this in 1942. They felt they could do it. Having looked through it, I think that while strategically on paper the operation is sound, fundamentally, I think there's going to be a lot of paratroopers with broken ankles, and you're going to basically have to catch the island by surprise and hope to God the Royal Navy isn't able to merge both Force H and the Mediterranean Fleet, which they will probably do, because in order for this to work, the Reggio Marina basically has to be out in force. Almost in totality. So there's a lot to go wrong. And that's the thing, in order to disable Malta, you've really got to take it. Just pounding it into rubble with aircraft isn't really going to degrade its capability to nil. You've got to take it. On paper, they have, I think they've gathered 5 paratrooper divisions, 4 of which are Italian, and I think they were guaranteed 1 German parachute division, and Hitler was tossing and turning about whether he was going to send another division of Fallschirmjäger down. And then they also, I know he did, but it's been asked again, so I don't mind answering it again. Like I say, on paper, the plan looks reasonable, but in reality, I don't know whether it would succeed. Then again, as we all know full well, paratrooper operations can be horrifically bloody, but still succeed, a la Crete. Now, Crete and Malta aren't the same thing, I'm aware. But I would say that while it is an off chance that the Axis succeed in that operation, I'm not gonna say it's not possible, because that would go against the flow of history and the way we've seen things that shouldn't happen actually happen. So, the Axis have the forces, theoretically, to take Malta in 1942, but it's going to require basically everything going right for them. But they, in theory, have the forces to do it, but it's not going to be a guaranteed capture. And even if they succeed, it's going to be a horrifically bloody operation in manpower and materiel, and possibly ships as well, depending on whether or not the British fleet makes contact, which it may or may not. Steve Clark asks, French submarines in the interwar were quite popular exports. Why do you think... also, I forgot the thing. That's fine. That's not a problem. Were quite popular exports. Why do you think they were such a good option for the export market at the time over, say, the UK, US, Italy, or Japanese designs? Honestly, if it comes to export boats, during the interwar period, who you actually bought from tended to be more towards who you felt you could get a secure relationship for spares from. So you know, as the ping went out in announcements, the stream announcements ping went out, and there was also a massive server ping as well. Like there was a ping, Sea Dodders. There was a ping. Am I gonna have to start pinging everyone again? Because if this keeps happening, I'm gonna ping everyone. I'm gonna go back to pinging everyone again, and damn the consequences if this is what happens. Right. Okay, I'm gonna do this once. There. Right. If that doesn't get people to pick it up and actually pay attention, I don't know what will.
Feedbacks?
Right. Okay. So, you have a message from me, Steve? I don't recall I gave you a message to pass on. Do you have a message from me, or do you mean a message for me, Steve? Because I don't recall passing you a message. Okay. Oh, right. Sorry. Voice message text being what it is. Right. Okie dokie. So that. So anyway, to get back to the question. In regards to submarine exports in the interwar years, French boats were pretty popular. Probably because the French offered a lot of variation in their boats. You could get everything from a small 2-torpedo, 400 to 600 ton coastal boat, all the way up to a quasi-cruiser submarine, depending on what nation you were. Whereas a lot of other nations, in terms of their export designs, didn't really offer that. The Italians were basically the Italians didn't offer their cruiser subs for export, and almost exclusively offered their Mediterranean boats only. The Germans, through their subsidiaries, offered usually derivatives of the Type 2 or derivatives of the UB3. The British did offer export boats, but they were usually almost exclusively of the mid-range type. And I don't know if the US or Japan actually exported any submarines in any great numbers. The only Japanese export orders I can actually think of in terms of subs were actually to Thailand. That's the real thing here. It's that the French offer basically anything that anyone could want. And if you're not buying French, you're usually buying from your defense partner of choice. So, for example, the Turks and the Greeks buying Italian, the Thais buying from Japan, etc., etc.
I think the Greeks bought Yankee boats, didn't they?
Not as far as I'm aware. Fairly certain they bought. I think both the Greeks and the Turks bought Italian. It's quite weird. They ended up operating different versions of the same destroyer, funnily enough. Quite funny, that. So I did that one already. Knight. We can finally get to this question. Knight6831 asks, for Dragon, what else was wrong with the RR Clyde? As the Clyde vibration problem was due to the straight cut spur gear in the reduction gearbox, but that could be fixed. Is this something I don't have context for? I feel like this is something
It's
I don't
based
have
on the question
for.
yesterday.
Well, let's take it away. I have no context.
It's the vibration problem. And that they did not, and you say it could be fixed, but that's not necessarily true. A lot of different things can happen, which means, yes, this is.
It fundamentally requires you to redesign the gearbox for the engine.
And if you fix that, who knows what else might go wrong? It's in reference to basically what if the Rolls-Royce Clyde was chosen as the engine for the Wyvern instead of the Python, and it's a case of, well, there's not really any difference between the two. The Python's actually the more powerful engine, but the Clyde was refused because it had catastrophic vibration issues to the point where it would start tearing the engine apart, which is not something you really want in your plane.
No, not particularly. Yeah, okay, Rowan, message received, I see it.
Yeah, and it's one of those cases of... yes, it had issues with its reduction gear and its gearbox. The issue is through the development cycle, it's noted that that's a primary issue that's sitting on a bunch of other issues with the engine. And it's just not a particularly good engine.
No, it's actually an okay engine apart from the catastrophic vibration issues.
Yeah. Turns out, funnily enough, gearboxes are important. Who knew?
But it's more the fact that it's a jet engine that's in line with what everyone else is making.
Turboprop.
Turboprop with what everyone else is making, not what the British are making at this point.
Oh no! No! Right. Reboot Gilliman asks. Okay. Question for the Warhammer fans in the room: Reboot or Reboote?
Reboote.
Reboote Gilliman asks. Fundamentally, what caused World War I and World War II? World War I was caused by a mix of issues. Basically, it boiled down to its barest nub. It's this. Germany wants an excuse to attack Russia in 1914 because as far as they're concerned, if they wait any more than a year after that, Russia will be too strong for them to hit. They haven't taken into account the Russian weaknesses in terms of social cohesion or lack of money for certain parts of industrialization, so they are actually incorrect in that assessment. But as far as German High Command is concerned, they want a war in 1914, so back the Austrians to the hilt. The Austrians want to hit the Serbians because, as far as they're concerned, the Serbians have been constantly getting in their way in the Balkans, and therefore, and they've basically been handed what they see as a fait accompli, but they bungle the actually getting it going, which is what leads to the Russians which is what leads to the outcry over the assassination dying down. Which, if they'd actually moved when the outcry was still up, no one in their right mind could have defended the Serbs. But they didn't. They waited too long. The Russians are honouring their commitments to Serbia. The French are looking for any excuse to have a crack at the Germans. And the British are sitting there basically waiting for the Germans to make a stupid mistake to have them come in and, deliver the naval hammer blow to the forehead.
I think you undersold the French a bit.
I mean, you're overlooking the biggest and the direct cause of the war.
I mean, I've not... Well...
German unification.
That's not.
Fundamentally speaking,
Yes?
Germany
because-
is the one that escalated to the war to the extent that it actually was.
Oh no,
It's not only that, it's
It was.
the way Germany was unified
Thanks, Bismarck.
was through revanchism and external power.
Well, yeah, I know.
It was the destruction and the humiliation of France and their rivals. So what it led to is a Germany whose internal cohesion was reliant on them fighting wars and winning wars.
I'm gonna disagree with you.
Right, because of the extreme militarization of the
Blame
German
the
state.
Prussians. Basically, blame
In
the
the early
Prussians.
20th century, the extreme militarization of the economy in the 20th century. Like,
I think you're overselling.
people
both
don't
those
realize
points.
how
You're You're
No, it's.
selling that a little bit. I think. I'm aware
No,
that German...
I'm not. I can tell you exactly why.
Okay, I'm waiting. Please go ahead.
Because through the way Germany was unified, Bismarck admits himself in his writings, Germany has to expand. Because of how the power structure in the German Empire is set up through the Junkers.
Bismarck also writes that as far as he's concerned, Germany's borders are locked and should remain so, and she should seek to remain at peace with the other powers of Europe in his diaries as well. Hence
Yes,
why he builds
but
that
he
massive,
also.
that complicated mess and tangle of backstreet deals, alliances, non-aggression pacts, etc.
Yes, but that's because part of it is he's trying to stop the internal machinations of Germany breaking itself apart again. Because Germany in the east is very aristocratic with a ruling class of Junkers and a very controlled and centralized economy.
And yes,
Germany in the west, especially around the Rhine, is a very liberal economy. It's a free trade economy. It's very democratic. And these forces in Germany
do not mix that.
clash hard. And the reason Germany gets united, these two parts get united, is through war with France,
Yes,
through a common enemy.
Mhm.
And that's what makes World War One inevitable,
Well, yeah.
because one of the major powers
A great
won't
war.
survive without a Great War.
Well, yeah, a great war is inevitable. It's just a matter of when. But that's even without the Germans.
And that's the main cause of World War One.
Well, yeah, the main cause of World War I is the Germans basically going in and basically egging everything
Yeah.
up. World War II, basically Japan fucks around in.
It's
Asia.
World War One.
Yeah. Well, yes. But to be a little bit more specific here, Japan fucks around in China, and Germany's revanched at the same time. Italy fucks around in Abyssinia. The Soviets fuck around in Finland and Poland, and basically all of these events coalesce to lead to this domino effect where the three powers end up at war with the United Nations. Hitler is...
Let's admit it. An easier way to describe it, World War II happened because World War One fucked up.
Well, yes, but I wanted to be a little
Because
bit
the
more-
German state got its pride and its unity shattered by getting punched in the face by reality of what Germany is.
Yes.
A part of the reason you see the cultural chaos of the 1920s in Germany is born through World War One and the damage done to the German pride and national identity.
In which you could mostly blame the French on
Steve,
that one.
Steve, in regards to you saying no Fleet World 1 is a massive mistake on the part of Austria-Hungary because the Serbs reached a 9.5 out of the 10 demands after the Princeps kills Ferdinand. It's a massive overreaction. Steve, the demands were always supposed to be rejected. Even if the Serbs had accepted all of them, the Austrians would have gone back with a list of even higher demands to force the Serbs to not accept something.
Well, no, the Serbian government would accept it. The Serbian people weren't.
It doesn't matter, Foxo. The whole point.
Yeah,
of
but
the
the
Austrian...
it's like
It doesn't matter because the Austrian government doesn't want it to be accepted to begin with.
The Austrian
Yeah.
goal, as soon as Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, is the total annihilation and annexation of Serbia. Anything else is not acceptable at that point. It doesn't matter what demands they submit. If Serbia keeps accepting, eventually the last demand will be total integration into Austria.
Yeah.
Because that is the Austrians' goal. They would...
kind of.
Yeah, no, it is. That's as far as the Austrians are concerned.
Yeah, but it's also tied to Serbian, Balkan, and South Slavic nationalism,
Yeah, I know, but the whole point I'm making...
which Serbia inspires by existing.
Yes, yeah. I know. But like I say, the goal is it's not the why of why the goal is. I'm saying the goal is the annexation of Serbia.
And it's like, but what makes that entire setup and that entire play possible is German militarism and German nationalism.
Yeah, and the Austrians. Also going
Because
to
by
Europe.
1910, Germany wants the war.
Yeah.
What Russia and Austria starting to go at it is just the excuse.
Now, let's admit it, most countries in Europe at that time pretty much wants it.
Steve, Foxo never mentioned. None of us have mentioned the stab in the back theory once at all in the conversation.
What is the stab
Well, I
in the
guess you
back
could-
theory?
And also, the stab in the back theory, Steve, was a thing actually almost in the immediate aftermath of the war. The Nazis hijack it, yes, but it's a myth that is written up by the general staff in the immediate aftermath of the conflict.
Because
just-
fundamentally, it's a
Stop.
consequence, not a cause. Because the cause of the myth is that Germany's just had its national pride shattered, and its identity as the center and the powerhouse of Europe shattered.
That's not being.
And
stabbed in
so
the
they
back,
look,
that's just what
and so
happened.
the people look for an excuse, and they do what they've done throughout history.
Mhm.
They did what the Spanish did after the Napoleonic Wars.
Yep.
They find a minority and they blame them. And from that outgrows the stabbing the back myth.
Yeah.
Because that's fundamentally, it's not our fault, it's not the Germans' fault, it's the others in our society, it's their fault.
It's the communists, it's the Jews, it's the whatever you prefer. Whatever
It's the liberals, it's the university students, it's the Poles who kept uprising and refusing the draft.
And then, of course, if you're on
It's the Ukrainians burning their own fields.
Yeah, and all the sides do this, for example. It's not just the nationalists or the aristocrats. The communists saying it's the aristocrats who are to blame. It's, it's all sides are doing this in the mess that is Germany in the early 20s.
Yeah.
But anyway, I feel like we've kind of gone a little bit,
And the stab in the back myth is the one that survives.
yes. Tankax asks,
Understandable.
I'm working on an alternate history scenario, mainly focusing on the Regia Marina. To keep it simple, the Frogmen didn't get their funding cut, and the Vittoria or Vittoria Veneto are available for not rebuilding the Dulio class. Not rebuilding the Dulios? I don't think that could speed up the Littorios. Their guns
No,
aren't...
that won't speed up anything.
Yeah, their guns aren't ready. Yeah, the Andrea Dorias.
It would save you money and you have a spare dockyard to do something with it, I guess.
When did
But
the rebuilds take
You're not building another Finito or another Littorio in that dockyard. You could probably stuff a cruiser out of it, maybe.
Yeah, because bear in mind, the Dorias go in 1937, and they go into yards that are not going to be used for building the Littorios.
They're not big enough.
Yeah. The whole point is that they're supposed to be adjutants to the Littorios.
Which basically means that you could probably stuff a cruiser out of it, but is that useful compared to a rebuilt, Dorio?
Yeah, considering the Dorias and the Cavors are still faster than most of the ships in the British Mediterranean fleet and are overkill against anything that isn't a battleship. Which at that point gives you 4 very useful assets. And if
The general opinion of the group is basically refitting the Dorias is not a mistake,
also
and is something it should be done.
And again,
based on the situation.
And again, the problem with this hypothetical you've done is, okay, let's assume, for example, let's say that the Italians get on the march with the rebuilds quicker, and the Duilios are rebuilt earlier, they get on the march quicker with the Littorios, and they have Littorio and Vittorio Veneto available in. Hang on a minute. The Littorios are available in 1940. Well, one of them is.
Yeah.
What am I saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, both Littorio and Vittorio Veneto are already. I don't understand the general conceit of this question. The Littorios and the Vittorio Venetos are built alongside the Duilios, and all of them basically come into service. The Littorios are in service before the Duilios are even. Sorry, the Andrea Dorias are even rebuilt. In May. So, I mean, they have all of these ships, but getting all that aside, so, if the Frogmen attack the anchored British up at Alexandria, sinking the Carrier Eagle and the battleships Warspite and Malaya, how would this affect the battle for the Mediterranean? Well, I assume by sunk you mean sunk and non-recoverable, or not recoverable in a decent amount of time. If that happens in July 1940, at a time when the Italians can get the fuel for a full fleet sortie, that is a major problem for the RN. Because at that point, that is...
Only KGB... Hang on. Yeah, only KGB is barely coming online by that stage.
Yeah, this is a really bad. And also you've still got, and I think at this point that's a really thing is basically
and that's a shady situation.
Even if the British want to move stuff into the Med, that's gonna take a couple of days to a week, and that's all the Italians need to run a large convoy, and I mean a properly large convoy to North Africa. Really, and by that I mean basically to replace their troops that are not exactly what I'd call acceptable, with troops that you could expect to at least fight a decent action against a numerically inferior force.
I mean, you say that, but
If the Triumph force you through, they made themselves easy targets for the Royal Navy.
Well, yes, but
Just-
the Royal Navy, like at this point, the Italians can sortie in such strength that unless it's the RN submarines having a crack, I really wouldn't want to be hitting that convoy. They just don't have the mass.
Right, okay. The convoys that are going into North Africa at the time are already at the maximum capacity of the North African ports. To the point of the Italians are mooring ships outside the port. And you want to put battleships for that
Well, I wanna put
in a
battleships
tight
as-
space?
No, I don't want to put them in the ports, Fox. I want them to cover the convoy. They're not gonna.
Yeah, you want them to cover the convoys that most of it's going to be sitting outside the port.
Yes, but obviously you'd have to be stupid to have your ships anchored outside the port. You'd be moving around. You'd be.
wait. So hang on. When did he say Eagle, Warspite, and whichever one was sunk?
He didn't say when they were sunk. He just says the British fleet anchored up at Alexandria, sinking the Carrier Eagle and the battleships Warspite and Malaya. Presumably he means in June 1940. With the image.
Do you know what happens? They just get refloated.
Yes,
Yeah.
but that's going to take time. And if the
It
frog
didn't-
and if the frogmen escape, which is this is the difference here. If the frogmen escape and tell the Italians what's happened, which would be the key difference between this operation and the historical one. The reason the Italians didn't capitalize on the historical success of the operation they conducted in 1941 or 42, I believe, is because they
Where does it say they escape?
Well, that would be the difference. It doesn't say they escaped, but assuming
But-
that
But the issue is, Flea, is that the frogmen massively underestimate the damage they do.
And also, relatively speaking, the ships aren't out of action that long
well, assuming
in the
it says-
how it happened historically.
Yeah, well, it says sunk rather than.
Yes, but Queen Elizabeth was sunk
the
historically.
problem is there's two. This is the problem. Both of us are operating on assumptions, but neither of us have the facts to enable either of us.
Well, I'm assuming basically the same thing happens to what happened historically in terms of they sank them.
But we can't assume.
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Fleet, Fleet,
No,
think of it
let's
this
just assume the route of action. Let's just assume the route of action, right?
Well, I was going to say, think of it this way: how do you fully sink them in Alexandria Harbour?
Dragon.
No, I don't think it's actually Fox up. I don't think it's actually shallow enough for them to fully sink. I don't think it's deep enough for them to fully
It's not,
sink.
but let's just say they're out of action just for the sake of the question. Because from reading it, that's what the question's trying to imply.
Okay, so bang on what Foxo said about North Africa, that's not really viable. I mean, there
And
is-
the issue is that North Africa has a throughput issue for the Italian army.
yeah. So
In
war-
1940, they have the supply capacity in the merchant marine. They don't have that in North Africa.
Yeah. So maybe North Africa isn't the play then.
No, it
Malta-
would never be the play.
Malta's going to be hell.
Because
either
they're
way.
gonna have to land in Tripoli.
Yeah.
Because the British army are doing funny things and are threatening Benghazi.
Malta's going to be hell anyway. So that may not be the best option. The invasion of Greece hasn't started yet, so that's not on the table either.
And
I
remember,
mentioned-
this isn't the British army in North Africa that the Italians are actually capable of fighting against. When it gets split in half and half gets into Greece.
Well, no, this
I
is
also
the,
like to
this- well,
comment.
This is the 1940s
This is
British
the
army,
Br-
this is the
Yeah,
tiny
that has its
British-
motorized elements still. That has its air force still. That has its strike capability still. Yes, they're fairy battles. But when your opponent's using biplanes, the battle's good enough.
Not
I
against,
also
We're
like
gonna-
to
not
comment.
against the
Yes,
TR-32
actually, but
and
go
42s.
on, Moe.
Yeah, but Fleet, they weren't deployed in North Africa because they couldn't be supported in North Africa.
Right.
At this
Moe's
point.
been trying to say something for a while now, so
If this was done early enough in July 1940, it changes the entirety of Operation Catapult.
In what way? No, I'm genuinely
You
curious.
just-
In what way?
You just lost Eagle and 2 battleships.
Oh.
It fundamentally means that shooting up the French ships may not be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it?
but on the other
If you,
hand,
if you
though,
acquired the
can't risk-
entirety of the French fleet without any issues, you fix your entire issue of losing 2 battleships by
The
quite
problem is
literally
that-
gaining the new set of
problem
ships.
with
but-
is Moe,
But
that
we
you'll
can't
still
model
have
that though.
you'll still have you'll likely still have the same issue historical, in my opinion, because you've got,
John, sorry.
you've got the same people in charge of the French fleet there are still in charge.
Yes,
Yup.
I know.
So
But
likely
And
they'll
we
still
can't
force the
model
same.
that effectively because
No,
they're
I just think that
complete
it might
retards.
change the Royal Navy side of things,
Also,
where they might consider shooting the ships itself be not a viable option at all.
or they commit much harder to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start off with. Can we go back to what was the question again?
It's a long question,
The
so
question was,
right.
Yeah.
if the frogmen attacked the British up at Alexandria, sinking the carrier Eagle and the battleships Warspite and Malaya in July of 1940, how would this affect the Battle for the Mediterranean? And he has clarified in the chat, saying that as far as the question is concerned, they are out of action, but he doesn't say whether the Italians know or not.
Okay, so it's slightly more historically. In July 1940, and so
they've
they
also
do.
nailed Eagle. They've also
Which
nailed
battleships
Eagle.
did they get in July 1940?
Fight Malaya and Eagle.
Yeah, so they get Warspite Malaya, and they also get the carrier Eagle.
Okay. So, right then. That means Illustrious is going to be pushed out as soon as she can be. That also means, in the nicest way, I don't think any forces are going to Greece.
I don't think they. When does the Greek campaign start?
not anytime soon.
No, but the reason I say forces aren't going to Greece is because until you can reconstruct enough of battle lines to protect the Eastern Eastern Mediterranean supply lines,
Yeah.
you're not going to do it.
Yeah, the invasion of Greece is in October anyway, so this is after the shockwaves.
Yeah, so we've.
Also, in the nicest way, you have to remember this is going to come on July 1940. It's going to come on the loss of Royal Oak as well.
Yeah.
So now the Royal Navy is down 3 capital ships.
Now it's highly likely they'll be able to refloat Eagle, Warspite, and Belair, given the way Alexandria Harbour's laid out.
No, they're out of action for 6 months. Okay, they're out of
No,
action for
I-
3 to 6 months. If
no,
they've
I-
gone down that damage, so
I
they are
didn't-
off the board
I-
as far as the Royal
I-
Navy is concerned.
I didn't say they weren't, Dr. Clark.
No, but then, the thing is, Fleet, I'm in the middle of trying to give my answer, and you're jumping in.
Carry on.
I'm being nice, but I've just pointed out because you jumped in, and I was in the middle of giving my answer and trying to explain things through us from my perspective. And I've been listening to you explain your perspective, and you put forward a very interesting argument and a very interesting, thought-through point of view. Okay, but just explaining my own.
Carry on.
So, they're gone for about 6 months. The Royal Navy is going to be dealing with that as an issue. There is certain forces around, you can move around, but you also have to remember this is Sharnos and Gneisenau are also running around, so you still need the R's pretty much in the North Atlantic for their convoy escort duties. You also need anything newer in the North Atlantic for those duties. You still need a congregate Force H. You are probably not getting any benefit from the French, because, let's be honest, the French aren't much benefit at this point.
No.
So that's going to be the same as it was historically.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So realistically, you've got 2 options to make up the shortfall. And naval power is going to be your first emphasis before you get into the army and etc. But the army is probably not going to be able to deploy to Greece, and that's a real factor. But there is a possibility that you get the Royal Navy calling up their friends, the Chileans, and doing something which the Americans considered later, but the British never really had to consider. But because of the speed at which they can get the ships into service, unless you can suddenly rush the next, the King George, the Prince of Wales, Duke of York, Anson and Howe, you're in trouble. They might well be talking to the Chileans about borrowing their battleship.
Yeah. Victoria could be wrong.
There's another part of this which I'm kind of curious about, because it could actually have more of an effect than I think. It mentions the Italian battleship rebuilds aren't done,
I mean,
which means the Italian battle line is much worse overall.
Well, yes.
Yes, they've got more guns, but they're now 21 knots.
Dragon, as we said at the start of this
Which-
question, that whole line of thinking in the question doesn't make any sense, so we disregarded it.
In any scenario where that's the case, then the Italians will have used that yard time to build their ships earlier, so they might have started building the Littorias earlier, which means there are more Littorias in service.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Is that by this point, Littorio and they're basically the full Littorio class is finished by the sounds of it, but
No, it just says the
the rebuilds
total
haven't
number.
been done.
Look, I think the question is it's fundamentally misunderstood how the rebuilds worked and how Littorio and Vittorio Veneto were built. They didn't take the yard space. The rebuilds, as far as I'm aware, didn't take yard space away from the Littorio program, and the Littorios weren't delayed by the Andrea Doria's rebuilds. As far as I'm aware, that the two programs ran side by
Scheduled
side.
around them. They are scheduled around them. It's not so much delayed. I think that's a misunderstanding. They are scheduled around them, and there is a limit of infrastructure. You can only do 2 Littorios at the same time, whilst you're also doing the Andrea Doria rebuilds. Because of the infrastructure limitations. That suits their program and schedule development they've developed and what they've decided to do. But if you're not doing the Andoria class rebuilds, then you can probably. I'm not sure if you're necessarily going to have all 4 in service by 4 in service by 1940, but you could probably have the 3rd one because of the infrastructure requirements and the things you're putting into it. If you consider the state of the sheer scale of rebuilds and how much of that work has to be custom work versus stuff you can build to plan. Because it's not so much that they cause delays; it's that they take up resources which you would have. If you're not using those resources for that, you can put those resources into something else.
The concern for the Littorios isn't the yard space; it's the steel being stretched between a large submarine program and the Dulio reconstruction they've asked.
It's what they've learned in the dry dock.
So that theoretically, without that, would they be able to get them potentially quicker, or if the steel is now fully dedicated to the Littorios?
Potentially, you've got the 3rd one. I don't think you've got the 4th one any earlier. Any earlier than before 1940.
Yeah, I mean, if you can lay down Roma in 36, 37, you might have her by late 40, 41, rather than June 42. Which does mean that you might get Impero in June 42. So you might get all 4 by that point. Right, so where were we? YouTube Minecraft Watcher asks, what if Britain and Germany in 1895 created an alliance? Germany doesn't challenge British holdings, and Britain will ignore Germany ripping the Russian Empire apart. Well, Germany and Britain did it. There were voices on both sides of the North Sea that were looking towards an alliance in the 1890s, but they were frequently torpedoed. Partially by the German commitment to building a large fleet. Basically, the evidence becomes overwhelming that fleet's pointed at Britain, and at that point, the British overtures towards an alliance with them. The voices arguing for it become less and less, shall we say. But if, let's say, somehow the Germans agree to limit their navy to a force bigger than France and Russia, but not so large the Royal Navy can't easily handle it, and that leads to a bipartite pact between Britain and Germany, then that's going to be interesting going forwards. I don't think Germany will rip Russia apart, at least not at first. The Great War is going. The Great War is going to be a British-German victory because there'll be no blockade, and Germany will just steamroll in every direction. Because it will
Wouldn't necessarily say that.
Because it will also have a more powerful army. Because remember, if the money is not being spent on the ever-increasing naval laws, that can instead go to the German army instead.
I'm not going to say that results in a steamroll, though.
I mean,
Remember, it's not the German army that starts to break down first. It's the German civilian economy.
yes, I know.
It's probably still going to be a very slow, grinding war.
Yeah, but the civilian economy is just fundamentally not going to break down.
But hence why I don't think it's necessarily
It
a
will.
steamroll. It's a slow, grinding affair.
Foxo,
It's
Still
con-
grind in France.
what pressure is there on the economic machinery of Germany and Germany's food supply if the Royal Navy is, instead of stopping the supplies, guaranteeing they arrive?
aside from the fact that they've been overspending for a decade, they've got limited internal capital. Once they mobilize, they start suffering a labor shortage, and you can't import people anymore. Fleet, a lot of things.
Well, yes.
No, you can't import people, but you can buy food and stuff from Britain.
And also the Germans have access to the British financial systems. So in the same way that the British financial systems offered loans to the Entente, now that same line of credit will be available to the Germans during the war.
Honestly, the British are probably offering loans to both sides.
Well, the British are going to be fighting on the same side because the whole point is.
As everyone's saying, even doing this doesn't replace overall personnel.
Yeah.
If the British are fighting on the same side as the Germans, then the war is over in about a year and a half. And it's the the British-German win.
Yeah.
Because you've coupled the largest European army with the largest navy in the world.
Plus the finances.
France is going to be cut off from their colonies. They've got the finances to keep it running. Without the BEF helping to hold up at the Battle of Mons, the Germans make it a bit further. And whilst the French do great actions in holding up the Germans, and they really do great actions, they're just going to be stretched that much further. And without the ability to get resupplies and import stuff from America and elsewhere in the world, and
Dr. Clark, I don't.
You got to figure it's also in the nicest way. Italy will side whichever one Britain goes with.
Yeah. Dr. Clark, I don't.
So you've got.
I don't think you're going to see Schlieffen, because think about it this way: if the British and the Germans are aligned, the actual plan will instead be Russia first, rather than France first.
You will always get Schlieffen first. The entire point of Schlieffen is you have to knock out France first, because France and Russia are allied.
You get France.
Here's the thing. Here's where things are different. Because Britain is going to categorically state outright Belgian neutrality can't be violated, even by an ally. And also, politely, if Britain is there as well, Britain can close France off from the west. It can close France off from the vital resupply of colonial troops from North Africa that it will need to bulk up its front for a proper full-scale offensive against the German holding force in what was Alsace-Lorraine. Which means that, and politely, that means...
That's underestimating the French.
I'm not underestimating the French. I'm not saying they won't try, but I'm saying they won't succeed. There will not be.
There's a reason the Germans thought they'd succeed.
I think you get France first for a different reason, and I think you still go round them. But I don't think you need to go through Belgium. You've now got the Royal Navy to back you up. You can do an amphibious assault. I've done a video on it on my channel.
Not at the scale
the British
need.
With the German liners and the British liners funneling troops, and the Royal Navy holding the channel. And the thing is, what you do is you wait till the French are already committed to the front, and then you land the troops behind them.
I mean, I suppose
that just sounds like Gallipoli times 1,000.
No, it's not Gallipoli. Gallipoli is the Germans. Is the Ottomans know you're coming and have managed to repair. This is actually a thought through plan.
Yeah, but the French are also going to predict that.
But in a nice way, what do the French options have?
What
do the French have as an option? Where do they protect on their coast? They have to protect everywhere. Well, then they're not going to have enough troops for their border, are they? With Germany.
And also, Japan's going to be doing funny things in the east as well. Let's not forget.
Yes, and Italy will be aligned with Britain as well.
And Austria-Hungary will probably also be folded in as well.
Yeah.
This will basically just.
So basically, you've got a nicer way, and the reason they take out France first is because not only are they quicker to mobilize, they're the only one that's they're the one that's a real threat at this point. And in a nice way for the Russians, the moment the Japanese are involved, then are they mobilizing to go east or go west?
Yeah, basically. It's a fait accompli. The entire war is basically a fait accompli over in a year and a half.
Yeah. And basically, the French Empire is split up amongst the Allies.
Typical gunnery officer. And the Russian Empire is subjected to something like Brest-Litovsk, which is, good lord, the poor Slavs. Typical gunnery officer asks, opinions on the UK ADORS 2 combat system on the HMS Bristol. Do you think it's miles better and more sophisticated than the early Aegis system on the early Tycho? I mean, okay, I'm going to answer this question with the no, it's not. Aegis is better by miles. But it's also a more modern system than the one on Bristol.
Can I say something on your behalf, Fleet, to gunnery officer?
If go ahead, but I reckon it's similar to what I was going to say. But go ahead.
Gunnery officer, I love how fiercely patriotic you are for Britain. I really do. I think you're an American who's fiercely patriotic for Britain, but I do love it.
Yes.
It makes my heart grow many, many times. But just because it's British does not mean it's better than its American equivalent. I wish it was so, but that is not the way the world goes. Usually with these systems, the trick to go is when were they built and what were they built for, and they will be better in certain ways in the period they're built than the equivalent system at the time. But more often these things are usually half a dozen on one and 6 on the other. So whilst you might make my little heart very, very big and very happy whenever I hear these questions, they are kind of loaded ones for poor Fleet to deal with, because he is British, and if he says yes, it's going to make him yes straight off. It's going to make him sound like an egotist.
I mean, you know full well, Alex, that I do not go up to bat for systems that don't deserve it, and I am very fond of.
I know, but as I will say from my own experience on YouTube, the amount of times people who claim that I am I just massively support Britain and think Britain's only amazing, and don't. I'm just an Anglophobe. I sit there Anglophone.
Anglophile, I think you mean.
I find it funny. Anglophile, yeah.
Yeah, because
Sorry.
I
sit there and go.
Yeah,
Have you ever heard the amount of critiques I give on our procurement process and the
Yes.
amount of things we get wrong and how often I'm saying that?
Yes.
No, they never seem to listen to that. They
No.
just go.
It's
Yeah.
convenient. But what I will say is,
But that's life.
What was it? Oh yes. I don't think anyone could accuse me of not being fair. After all, I do definitely give everyone a good share of the old 9 and 10. But very quickly, I'm just going to make a quick announcement. Gunnery Officer, I do dearly love your questions, but I'm just going to say this. Can we get more questions from you like the one you've asked next question 3, which is a nice hypothetical, good topic for discussion, and less of these direct system comparison versus system comparison, especially ones like this where they are not equivalent systems in the same era, so it really is a simple yes, no, one is better than the other answer to the question. Just a friendly PSA from your host here at the Rambling Show. 96831. If Japan's Versailles proposal had been worded to clearly state what it actually meant instead of what people thought it did, why might it still fail? The wording of that question is very, 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 very leading there, Knight, I'm just going to say. But
Which specific proposal of their Versailles proposals are you talking about?
and why do you think it might
Because they
still
made
fail?
multiple.
Yeah, and why do you think it might still fail? I don't have the context. Is this in relation to something else that another video has been made?
Well, I discussed their naval proposal at one point in the background of the Washington Naval Treaty. They proposed a racial equality clause and a few other things at Versailles, specifically for the League of Nations.
If that's what it's referring to, that was never going to fly. Not in that period.
It actually did get a majority vote, but it was voted down by USA and Australia.
I wonder
Woodrow
why.
Mother effing Wilson.
Even if Woodrow Wilson hadn't been, and it doesn't matter, any US president, basically apart from Theodore Roosevelt at that period, would have voted it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's Woodrow Wilson. You were guaranteed 100%. He was never going to agree with anything like that.
The man was a clan member. Don't ever forget
The man
that.
was a clan member so extreme, most clan members didn't like him.
Indeed.
Let's be honest. This is going to get me into trouble, but whilst the clan was built for a very bad purpose, and there were lots of people who use it for its original purpose, there was also a large section of the clan in certain periods which is basically turned into a drinking club with how do I put this politely, very bad subcurrents.
There's a reason why a lot of people are able to break out of it. There's a reason why a lot of people are able to break out of it when confronted with the worst sides of it. There's that black musician who was able to get like several thousand people out just by meeting them and talking to them.
Yeah, and it was like one of my very, very much older relatives. I think they were of my grandfather's generation in the United States. They always refused to join, even though the area they lived in, the clan was quite strong. And one of their friends, actually, and this was a joke they used to make. One of their friends said, "Well, you go drinking with us anyway in the pub. It's just the same." And he went,
No.
"Yeah, but I don't like the jokes."
Yeah.
And I think I would say that's not really what my view on the subject is, but I would say making that comment, feeling confident enough in 1920s deep rural South America to be able to make that kind of gives me the impression that the clan was one of those organizations which was very much evil in so many ways, especially in its wider terminology name.
It wasn't one organization.
But in terms of actually being an effective organization, was probably frigging useless in most part.
Basically,
and being an homogenous, effective organization.
It shattered after the antebellum social order was re-established by force and terror in 1876.
Well, it was never really one organization, though.
Yeah.
It was more a movement instead of an organization.
Yeah, it was only
because
really
even looking at the difference between the Alabama and the Mississippi chapters, you notice that there's a lot of difference between them, with a couple horrible, absolutely horrible unifying features. After all, slaves don't pay taxes. Sorry.
I know exactly where you took that from.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It's not just from that, though, but there's a book I've been reading called The Economic Argument Against Slavery. And it's interesting.
Uh-huh.
If you ever want to read, there is some. How do I put this? There is some really disturbing literature from the 1920s and 30s, mostly because it's just so antithetical to how we would think about things today. Of when the Ku Klux Klan tried to establish branches in the UK. And how badly they failed. And mostly they failed because they completely misunderstood the UK scenario, including at one point they approached a prominent businessman and were being very rude about Jews and didn't realise he was Jewish.
Yeah.
Because he was a lord.
Yeah.
So of course he couldn't be Jewish.
Yeah.
And it's just this is why at certain points it's one of those, it's why as an organization, as a broader organization, I almost sometimes find it hard to take them seriously because of these accounts, because they just are so
wrapped up in their own misogyny,
silly,
racism, and silliness that they really can't be taken seriously.
Yes. Yeah, and then you sit there and see some of the things the evil things they do, and you sit there and go, "Oh, good God!" The fact is, they did this and they're terrible. But I'm honestly still surprised they managed to figure their way out of a wet paper bag to do it.
That's what makes
which-
them actually horrifying. That's the thing.
Yeah. Occasionally, when they manage to break out of the wet paper bag and figure their way out, then they do some truly terrible things.
Yeah. Anyway, that little aside.
I mean-
that little aside into the horrific organization now done with.
We've got a really positive
no.
point to end on.
Oh, all right. One positive point, and then we're moving on.
About it being really. I should find his name. But has anyone heard of Daryl Davis? Who's an American blues musician.
That's the guy I was talking about. Yeah, that's the guy.
Oh,
I was
yes,
talking
yeah.
about, yeah.
And he's the guy that sort of proved that a lot of the KKK's power was because people weren't normalized to other people in these areas.
Also, it's a classic movie where he's talking on the phone to a guy, and the guy goes, "Oh, I can tell you're not black because of the way you're talking." And you sort of go, "That's just hilarious, my friend." I sit there and go, "No." Some of the, it's also, I think that also caused some fun in the UK occasionally, but we'll leave that to one side.
Yeah.
We've got the Nazis and the KKK now. This rambling's going brilliantly.
We're gonna get demonetized. Everyone sign up to Bleach Patreon. He's gonna need it. This video's gonna get demonetized.
Yeah.
Nix.
Next question. Civic officer, what if Poland wasn't as much impacted by the Great Depression and could somehow build its military after knowing the German rearmament in the mid-30s? How would war have changed in 1939? How would France and the UK react to this? Well, the Poles were doing a reasonable job of upgrading their military. The Polish military was one of the larger forces on the continent for most of the interwar period. And this is the thing a lot of people miss. The Polish military, through its system of mobilization and reserves, could fight a war of defense after trading land for time against either Russia or Germany, which would buy time for reinforcements for Britain and France to arrive. It can't do that against both sides smashing sledgehammers in from the other from well, first of all, Akizuki, I'm not monetized anyway. I still haven't passed 500 subs, so it's not a problem. But yeah, so the Poles can fight a war of grinding resistance against one of their neighbors, not both. And we see the system starting to swing into action as the Germans reach the high water mark of their logistical chain for the Panzer Corps. Once they've gotten to Warsaw or past it, the tanks are starting to slow. I haven't missed the question. But anyway, so to get back to the topic, assuming that the Poles are investing more in their military, then
they're significantly weaker.
What?
Yeah.
How can you spend more and be weaker?
Can I debate that one?
Because
Foster?
what generation of equipment do you buy?
No, it's not even that, but it's where you taking the money from. Because the Poles are skin, and the Poles are doing stuff like uniting the national railways,
Well, it's
bridging gaps in the railway.
Yeah,
On the other hand, though, there is
They're
definitely
actually
things they could do that would
stopping
improve.
the famine in eastern Poland.
yes, but the whole
It's
point.
like the Poles, you put more money into the military, you take money away from that.
Well-
You've got a weaker Poland.
Well,
If they've-
no.
If they've been less affected by the downturn, let's say, let's say, what was it? They managed to get a favoured trade nation status with the British Empire, so they're trading within the British Empire as if they are part of the British Empire, so they're in part of the imperial trade. and so they do better in they don't do as badly in a downturn because they can supply goods which are quite useful to the British Empire and to the as they were historically, but with none of the taxes in the way. So they're going to get a boost out of that economically. And if they do slightly better, they're going to have slightly more money to go around. And
Danzig's
that
still
slightly more money tends to be. Oh, Danzig is still going to be a problem. It is. But
that's their primary
what
trade
they-
capital that's deciding to not.
I think.
Yes,
I think
but the thing
overall
is,
it doesn't make much of a difference.
it doesn't make much of a difference, but basically, the other option, I'm just checking this. Look, there is a wonderful city in Poland
Gdynia?
which actually does have port facilities in this period which were not invested in, and if they'd been invested in, that would also fix their economy program.
Yeah.
That's Gdynia. That's just up the coast from Danzig, and it's the majority Polish city, and they are investing in it. But by the time of Great Depression, those facilities are nowhere near big enough. The primary trade nexus is still Gdansk.
Well, yes, but
Well,
But but the point I'm trying to make is that the Polish economy has the massive issue of it's isolated because of its limited ability to access the waterways for global trade, and which is why Great Depression effects are so shaky, because it's not the first hit or the second hit, it's the third hit. But anyway, you're saying?
I think you could see some more interesting stuff, like certain bits of the Polish military that was allowed to be put at the wayside would be improved. For instance, actual anti-tank defenses would likely be improved.
well, I mean,
No longer are your primary anti-tank system being anti-tank rifles. You might actually now have
the Dragon, the Poles,
stuff like 37
the Dragon, the Poles.
fleet.
had it.
Most of the defensive fortifications had two anti-tank guns.
Go-
2 Hotchkiss 40mm anti-tank guns.
Which, that's still better than the majority.
That's better than most armies.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not
also-
gonna
No,
lie.
it's not.
And
It's
also
not,
Dragon,
but-
the Poles had large numbers of domestically produced 37mm anti-tank guns based on a license design
That-
from the Swedes.
Not really enough though, and they weren't deployed well.
Well,
Nor were they
Because
invested.
they were kept in reserve.
But if you actually got spending more money on your military, there is reasons to pull these out of reserve and put them to where you'll actually need them.
well, yeah, they'll have the money to keep anti-tank detachments with the companies, battalions, and divisions.
In particular, you'll want it in fortifications more, because they actually do have some pretty decent fortifications.
I don't see that's where the Poles are going to invest. The Poles are going to invest more in their mobile military.
Fleet, those fortifications were what was invested in.
Well, in that case, then that
You've
investment
got the
will
whole
still-
thing of 40-1, where they help.
Yeah, but the issue is that a lot of the
finish
fortifications.
though, like
They're not building new fortifications.
they're not, but they are improving old, getting them so that they can resist more. This is why, if you've got more money for the military, they can try and focus on getting stuff up to snuff more. We see this, and they have a lot of very good programs. We know the 10 TP and 14 TP tanks were very good for the time, but due to lack of investment early on enough, they weren't ready for the war. Same for their planes. If you can give the Polish military that bit more funding, that they can actually start these projects earlier, they will be in a better state. But overall, it likely doesn't change much.
It's
delays the
fundamentally an
maybe
industrial
it delays the
capacity issue.
It might delay their loss by a month or two at best.
Because at the time of Polish independence and after the Polish-Soviet War, it was blatantly obvious that Poland had a massive industrialization problem. the industrial centres were not linked. There are two separate railway gauges that were trying to interact.
Yeah,
They didn't have unified locomotives.
Yeah, the big push of
They didn't have the industrial capacity.
Yeah, there's a massive push by the Polish state railway network in the 30s to convert the legacy Russian 5'6" to 4'8.5", and they do succeed. And they also do build a tranche of new locomotives, which is quite funny because they succeed almost in 39, prior to the invasion, and the Russians are then sat there going, "Oh, the tracks are 4'8.5" now. Shit."
Yeah, and it's like, but it's the fact is, spending more on the Polish army doesn't improve the capabilities of the army because the tail of that army doesn't exist yet. They're building the tail for it, and there is only so fast they can build it.
No, I am going to say that if they spend more on the army, they will actually be able to get more stuff because, as I said, we do know a lot of these development projects were basically paused or stopped because we need to divert money elsewhere. So if they have this extra money, then they do historically, they can likely do what was done historically, and then more. The whole point of this question is they are in a far better economic state, relatively speaking, than previous. This does not mean they have to stop doing what was done historically. It just means they now have more financial capital they can use for other things.
They're already at capacity.
They're not.
They are, because they're at their workforce capacity. Because they're lacking an educated parts of their workforce to operate. They're spending masses on actually getting educated people, actually having roads. You can only build those so quickly.
That's
An easy point where you can keep throwing money at it, but they can't build it any quicker because they lack the effective labor force.
I do think you're underestimating the Polish labor force here.
Yes, because but the issue is that the western regions of Poland have that. The eastern regions don't.
Yes, but the manufacturing capability, if it's in the west, is all you'll need.
But a significant part of it is not in the west. It's in Lviv.
No, a lot of it is based around Warsaw. Most of the major factories are in the west.
The big ones are Warsaw, not Polotsk. The city on the western border, I can't say its name properly, and Lviv.
Yeah, they're Polish, but...
Sorry, I can't say a Polish name properly.
Well, yeah, I can't say I blame you, it's Polish.
Yeah, and it's just a case of... As I see it, the Poles are already at capacity for what they physically can build and how fast you can expand a network and an industry. Because you can only throw so much money at an educated workforce.
Again, I disagree. There's definitely ways around this, but we're just going to end up going in circles, so...
But yeah,
I mean,
give the
they
Poles
could do what the Soviets did.
give the Poles more money, and they can fight harder in 39. I think is something I think we can all agree on.
Overall, it likely won't change the overall state of things much. France and Britain just go, thanks for buying us that little bit more time.
Yeah, they can't really hold. Like I say, historically, Poland can resist one side or the other for a decent length of time. We're talking months to years. It can't resist both for any significant length of time. So, moving on. YouTube Minecraft Watcher. What if the London Naval Treaty became a complete failure, aka in 1934 the US, Britain and France realising either Germany or Japan are going to listen to it and start building capital ships with 16-inch? Well, basically, that's not so much it failing as just all the powers allowing it to lapse and just not signing it. That's not so much it failing, it's just the sides recognising early that the treaty era is over. So at that point, you get the KGV. Dr. Clark, KGVs 15 or 16. Because that's what I need to know here. 15 or 16-inch KGVs. Given we've got the treaty lapsing in 34.
Wait.
Yes.
There's a second half to that question.
Oh, where's? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it?
Let's see. Alongside building the Essex class earlier, the British flaggers.
Okay. Okay, so
It's
yeah.
it's the segment immediately after Steve Clark.
Okay, yeah. So, complete failure. Alongside building the Essex class earlier, the British implacable design would be chosen. Well, I suppose the first thing to ask is, Dr. Clark, is that correct? Would the British choose the implacable early if there's no treaties? If Alex is still here.
I don't think he is.
There was a long.
Would it be more
silence.
audacious class? They're implacable.
Wouldn't be audacious not at this point.
No, yeah, I think you'd have
I
implacable
don't think the
audacious.
design
Then,
for Audacious is up yet.
yeah, you'd have
No, it's not.
implacable audacious. Malta would be your flow in terms of capital ships for carriers.
Because a lot of the carrier
Oh.
designs are essentially implacables when they say, okay, take the weight limit off. Sorry, yeah. Never mind. EP.
Sorry. Hello.
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 Oh, great. My illusions are talking to me.
Oh dear. But
So hang on, the question was 16-inch guns and
well,
what was the carrier?
well, basically, it was just saying the London Second London is not signed by anybody, and the Powers start building their new post-treaty ships in 34. And he has clarified that everyone's going to start building capital ships with 16-inch guns, and then apparently the Essex are going to be earlier, and the Implacables are being chosen. I feel
I
like
don't know if you would get the S6 as it was or as we know it.
Yeah, you've brought it forwards too early. You're going to see a totally different.
It's not
shape.
too early. It's more like you're gonna see much less selection in terms of what the Yorktowns went through. The fact that they went through like 7 different designs just because of the tonnage limitation. You're probably going to see one of the more bigger Yorktown designs that they were originally thinking about. And since there's no, restrictions anymore, they're just like, okay, let's just take that and run with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is just going to be...
France probably sits there crying in a corner.
The French will basically do what they did historically. You'll have something
They
like
don't have a choice.
You'll have something like Dunkirk and Strasbourg. Although you might get their
They don't have a
carrier,
choice.
you might get their carrier program earlier, which means you might have something in the water.
Not
by...
if they're building
No.
battleships, you're not.
No.
With
Yeah.
what yards fleet?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. Hang on. 34. When do
I could
just
see the
gonna check-
Joffrey's design changing a little bit,
just
maybe.
gonna check something real quick.
But I think
So
that's the
I've got
extent
the
of
facts
changes
straight
the French
now.
is going to do.
Where are we? No, hang on.
Because the French are an infrastructure limitation.
Oh, they're already-
And a lot of their battleships has already been planned beforehand as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, you can't really change. Changing this date doesn't change anything about the French build-up at all.
No,
Yeah.
nor the Italians.
Yeah.
The main issue is industrial capacity. You don't
Mhm.
want what you want, but can you build it?
The powers that are really going to be able to go with this are the Italians, the British, the US, and the Japanese.
What are the Italians going to do?
Well, they're going to do what they did historically.
There is actually potential that they would try and invest into the 16-inch gun earlier,
Because the
and you basically get an earlier version of UP-41.
I mean, you're just not going to
Would be
get
my
the.
thought.
You're just not going to get the rebuilds. if the tree, well,
Yeah.
sorry, you're not gonna get the you're definitely not getting the Dorias because the rebuild.
I thought we're mostly talking about changes in ship designs, but
Yeah, but
okay.
I
understand.
But yeah,
I
basically
understand.
what I'm saying is, because the Contadec of Ors have done it start in 33, but the Dorias don't start till 36, 37. And at that point, if everyone else is laying down new ships in 34, 35, the Italians are going to look at that and go, "Yeah, no, we're not messing around with a second set of rebuilds. It's not
No.
worth it."
It's not practical.
What
It's
a re-
not. Sorry, I had to disappear off. Then we
That's
were
all right.
being invaded by flying ants,
No.
so I had to go and help with the repellier.
Oh,
Yeah, help to repel the invasion.
Oh, good lord!
Time to call the EDF.
They don't-
Did the fluff do his
Yeah.
duty? Did the fluff do his duty?
Both fluffs they decided that, frankly, when faced with flying ants, that discretion was the better part of valor,
Shame.
and
Yeah,
left
they
it to
had
power.
Shame.
Well, yeah, they have aerial superiority fleet.
No.
Yeah,
Like, what are they meant to do?
and
Yeah,
they can get
Germany's lit-
in the fur and crawl all over the place. They don't feel
Ooh.
like that.
Oh, that's
They
good.
don't want
Like-
that.
Yeesh.
There's a reason why there's a reason why the flying ants and wasps and such are such a threat in EDF because they have aerial superiority now.
Flying ants.
Hee.
This is why I have as Fleet saw when he came to my office, I have one of those things, those electric zappers that you just stick up
Oh,
and just
yeah.
turn on, and the flies and things are attracted to it.
Yeah.
And I went in there, saw it, and I basically moved my office one so that there's now two sitting in the lounge area because we had one in the kitchen area anyway. Because they do seem to be attracted to that and getting merrily zapped away,
Pew, pew, pew,
and that's
pew,
far more
pew.
efficient than me trying to chase them down.
It's an anti
They-
aircraft fly gun thing.
Basically,
EDF, not IDF.
it's kind of like being a Dido class cruiser. You attract everyone to you, so you can have some fun.
Very funny, Alex. So I think my personal opinion on this is the Italians will want a pair of ships, so they'll build what we know as the Littorios in 35. So that will be a pair of ships with 15-inch guns, but then they'll be followed what we would know as the historical Littorio laydown times. They'll be followed by something similar to UP41, so a Littorio with 16s. So you'll have a 15-inch ship to get something modern laid down in 34, 35, and then the Italians will rapidly, because I know they can, they'll rapidly whip up a 16-inch gun to put on a ship to be laid down once the slips are clear from those vessels.
Is everyone building 16-inch gun ships then? The scenario.
Basically, London 1934 just doesn't happen.
That's what I was going to ask. If London 34 doesn't happen,
London isn't 34. It's 1930 and 1937.
No, second London. Sorry.
Yeah.
Second London.
Yeah.
means.
Well, it mentions 1934 though.
Yeah. So I think he's talking
So-
about second London.
It was the treaty collapsed in 1934.
No.
No.
Treaties didn't collapse until 38.
They collapsed in 30.
Yeah, but that's not the question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as in I think the question's more saying basically they realised, but in 34, yes.
If the,
It's clear
if the
they're not
first London
listening.
Naval Treaty collapsed in 1934,
Yeah.
yeah, then in nicest way, 16-inch guns are. Well, the British should probably have. British might go 16-inch. They might if they got rapidly, they might go 15-inch.
That was a question I asked when
it's-
I didn't realize you weren't here. I was going to say KGB.
Yeah,
equipment,
let
is
the
it gonna-
man cook, Flea.
Let him
Let
finish.
the man cook.
I was off dealing with flying ants.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I know.
I was
like,
I was dual wielding aerosol spray guns and going die.
Oh.
It's
yeah.
just EDF.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was literally going to be my
Um,
thing, Alex. Do you reckon the British are going to wait for 16s,
Yeah.
or are they going to go 9 15-inch guns? Go!
Well, they have a 16-inch gun program and they have a 15-inch gun program. The thing is, if they're looking at, it's going to sound strange if the treaty's collapsing, and if you consider the modernization process is going on. What they might do is you might find as 15-inch 45s being refitted into the older 15-inch ships to quickly upgrade them. Because the 15-inch 45 was developed, which was lighter than the 15-inch 42, but of course it's a 45, not a 42, so it's better. and they're probably going to have a new 16-inch 45 ready to go quite quickly. And again, they can test that out by replacing the guns on Nelrods quickly while they're building it. That's the advantage that the British have. So they can test and go which one's worth it value for money quickly and then do the upgrade. So they might actually wait a few months before laying down so they can test out. And then be evil to everyone because do a warrior and then just produce whatever they decide is best fit for them. But also, you have to remember, if the London Naval Treaty has broken down, then the size limitations on capital ships have broken down. So suddenly, you're probably getting capital ships of 45 to 50,000 tons. Which is going to affect, it's going to mean that the Italians might not build the Littorios as, even a Littorio as was earlier. They might be looking at building something with 12 15-inch guns and 4 triple turrets because the size limit has broken, the whole treaty's broken down. And we can all cry for Germany at this point because they're just going, but.
Also, I think France is also crying a bit because it's a case of, oh, brilliant. Well,
no, they dust off the bigger designs they have for Dunkirks and go with them.
Yeah, I guess yes, you get the bigger Dunkirks, but you probably don't get much bigger than Richelieu unless the French government actually invests in building new yards earlier.
To be fair, Richelieu is not exactly a small thing.
Yes,
No.
but considering what they were wanting, stuff like Alsaces.
Well, those are follow-ons to the Richelieus.
Yes,
Aligned
but
with-
these are the sort of things they're wanting. They also do want some 16-inch armed ships, but once again, the yards aren't big enough,
Well, yeah, like
and the actual industry behind them is also not big enough yet.
yeah, they're gonna
At least-
work towards it through.
Which is why they're probably crying in a corner, though, that, well, our enemies have got a head start
now.
on us.
And we have to
Yeah.
do this now.
Like,
there's also going to be Japan. Japan's going to be in trouble immediately because you can't go down the Yamato route in a scenario where everyone's already building big ships.
Yeah.
Yes, our super battleship with 9 18-inch guns, more powerful than any other ships in the world. Others looking, yeah, but we've got like 9 or 12 16-inch guns.
Well, to be fair,
You're not that much more of a threat.
if it's 1934, they don't have Yamato's plan's not done yet.
No,
Oh God, you
They're
get some
gonna have to go-
Hiragis Congo
they're gonna-
replacements.
they're going to have to go something like, they might even have to go for
Fukushima?
something with 16, 18-inch guns is about the minimum to try and achieve some kind of super battleship in this scenario.
I do not even want to imagine what that's going to have to look like. I do know there was
Well,
one design.
imagine what it's going to do to the Japanese construction and economy.
I do
Building
know
two of them.
There is one design that I've been shown, which is effectively, if people are familiar with the Izumo class in World of Warships, which is one of the Yamato prelims, basically
Yeah.
take that, scale it up. It now has 3 quad 18 or 21-inch turrets, depending on which variant you look at, as well as also, I think, 2 twin 8-inch turrets at the fore of the ship. You've probably started to look at stuff like that in terms of just what ludicrous stuff are they smoking to make this.
Well, that's the other thing. They might decide to go with the 20-inch gun. If everyone's getting
Yeah.
16 and 18-inch guns into service, they might try and go with a 20-inch gun and go with 920s
Yeah.
or even 1220s. But the really interesting, fun thing about this, of course, is if it starts and it breaks out like this, then it becomes a very public, qualitative race, and suddenly the whole thing of Yamato being in any way, shape, or form a surprise doesn't happen. But that also means that the American government is probably kicking and screaming and going, "No!"
No, we actually have to give money to the Navy.
Yeah. The US Navy's just going, yes, Congress. Look, the
British
Japanese are
government are
one-upping
going-
us.
The British government going, yes, we can get out of recession without becoming socialist. We feel brilliant. This is good for all of us.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, wouldn't that help the US as well in that regard? it will make the New Deal look tiny if they are going to take back up, capital ship construction. It should kill the unemployment rate quite a bit, right?
Yeah, it will do.
Also, what could be interesting is
But
what it might
also-
do to the older ships, depending on just how big of a production race this becomes. You could see older ships starting to be retired from the various navies as new ships come in and replacing them.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
in a
definitely.
nicest way. The Royal Navy, if they start the construction program in the 1930s, let's say 1934, well, if you consider it's roughly 2 years to get a generation of ships in, and if they are laying down a generation, they're laying down about 5 to 6 ships every year, 5 to 6 ships over every 18-month period. Even if they're doing that moderately at that point, and they, in this scenario they might not being so moderate, they could probably replace the entire battle line of the Royal Navy and still be getting up to 24 ships within 6 years. And
So
the thing is,
Italians will be looking at it nervously.
yes, but the thing about it's more probably from the Germans when they don't start their rearmament program until 1935, do they?
Mhm.
36,
Yeah,
35.
they're not going to have fun.
And everyone else is starting in 1934.
Oh,
They're already starting from zero, and everyone else has already started.
So once again, this means Bismarck can't exist the way it does historically.
Bismarck,
Right.
Scharnhorst, and Gneisenau can't exist like they did
Yeah.
historically.
yeah.
Yes, but at least
Because in
there's
a
a
nice way,
slightly better
Scharnhorst,
design.
people go, okay, they are a better design. People going, oh, they're cute. They've got 9 11-inch guns, and they do how fast? Oh, they do 30 knots. Oh, that's cute. So what's yours got? 12 16-inch guns, and it does 30 knots. Yeah, or 16 16-inch guns, and it does 30 knots. Or 12 18-inch guns, and it does 30 knots. And the poor Germans are just sort of crying in a corner somewhere going, we can develop something better. You can with time, but you can't overnight.
But I'm imagining something like a Pomeran from Warship, so they try and stick 12 15s on a hull.
And you know what's
Like,
the other
yes,
big problem about this?
Hmm?
If this all starts off this early? Guess who also gets in on it?
Soviets?
Well, yes, because dictators, they're always obsessed with their dictatorship and how big it looks. So if everyone else is doing a gun race where their guns, they're getting bigger, then suddenly, poor Stalin is going to feel so small. It's going to feel so weeny.
Mm-hmm.
So teeny weeny.
Yes.
I love the idea that that sociopathic psychopath could actually feel anything.
He can.
Believe it or not,
What do you mean you've
basically,
one-upped me?
so sociopaths, the only real things that sociopaths tend to feel are feelings of people if they feel slighted by other people. And basically, if you're a dictator at that level, that means other countries have one up to you. They have got something which is more impressive than you have.
Yeah, because there was a bit of a follow-on about this with how would the carriers go. Would you see stuff like the Essex and the Indefectibles and such come earlier?
Midways and Maltas. If you got the breakdown, basically you're heading towards the Midways and Maltas very quickly, because both the British and the Americans are making compromises based on the treaty limitations, what they can get. There'll be the Indefatigables sort of. The Indefatigables are probably the British stepping stone to their Maltas, and the or of the Implacables are the Americans probably to go with the improved Yorktowns as their stepping stones. Because honestly, the Midways are more of an improvement from the Yorktown line than they are anything from the Essex line. Because the Essex is in nicest way, a stripped down, mass produced version of a Yorktown. Whereas Midway is taking the Yorktown design and going, this is what the Yorktown would have been if we hadn't had any treaty limitations.
I've just seen it from Leslie. Heisen would be interesting, but Heisen is also a product of the Yamato research. She's one of the preliminaries for Yamato. I think it's A140, J2, and J3, technically. Say, so you're saying the Essexes are rubbish?
I don't think I said the Essexes were rubbish.
Well, they didn't quite use those words, using slightly
Well,
less polite words, but I don't remember hearing that either.
The Essex, in the context of having no restrictions on carrier construction, would be viewed as inadequate.
The Essex are we have these construction capabilities, and we have we have to maximize them. But without the treaty limits imposed, you build the Yorktowns to they're far closer to the Midway design, and you're probably expanding more on that design than going to the Essexes, because the Essexes are taking a Yorktown design and basically turning it into something you can mass produce. So it's the difference between, okay, we're building 3 or 4 of these cars, let's build them the best we can be, but we're building 3,000 to 4,000 of these cars, let's build them the best we can be. There is nothing wrong with the Essex design in that regard. It's just, this is the scale we're building it at. So if you have built up, if you've got, end of the treaty, if the treaty system's gone, you've not got the pressure to build something like the Essex in terms of those numbers at that time, suddenly as an emergency, or rather suddenly as a criteria, because we've got a 2-ocean fleet because of the risks that have been rising of war on one side and the Japanese on the other side. But you've got the time to build. So what you do is you're going to build from the Yorktown design out, and the Yorktown is the last of their great peacetime designs. And then they have the Midways, which are basically taking a Yorktown and adding armor to it and turning it into a fusion with a British armored carrier, with what the British had done instead of the armored carrier project. Because basically the Americans had gone, right then, we're going to be fighting in the Pacific primarily. We need air group because we can maneuver. So that's what we can do. The British were going, we're going to be fighting up the South China Sea. We're going to be fighting in the Mediterranean. We're going to be fighting a long way from our logistics line. So we need aircraft carriers which are easy to maintain, and air groups. We need to also be able to retain our air group, because it's better to have some aircraft than no aircraft. So that's why the British go with the way they go. But neither nation wants to do that. Both nations want to go for a carrier which has survivability and a carrier which has air group. That's what they both want to do. That's why the British, in almost every design study, produced their 27,000-ton dream carrier of roughly 27,000 tons, which has all the armor, has all the torpedo protection, has all the has the air group, is beautiful, and then they work down what can we cut from that to make it fit within our treaty limits, and what are we prepared to cut. And the Americans work similarly. So we know what their dream design would have. Huh?
I was just saying they do have a 27,000-ton design for Yorktown, because they were thinking if they want 2 carrier or 3 carriers out of the limitations.
Yeah, basically the British and the Americans work on. They produce a 27,000-ton design, which is basically has everything they really would want. Yes, if they had no treaty limit, it would probably be about 30,000 tons, but it's 27,000-ton design. And then they take the stuff off it to work it down to the tonnage they're prepared to accept within the treaty limitations. So everything, Yorktown or the Illustrious class or Ark Royal, they're all compromises.
Oh boy.
They're all compromises. None of them are built to the fullest of their ability. And because Yorktown, therefore, is limited in that way, and the Essexes are a version of Yorktown designed for mass production. Again, they're not the very best carriers America could build. Are they very good carriers? Yes, they're still very good carriers. They're just not the best America could have built, because of the design and all the history that comes behind them.
So basically, they're very good carriers in the context of what they're in the original timeline. But in a timeline where the Americans can build the carriers they want, they're mediocre to poor carriers, because they do make some unnecessary compromises.
Yes, That's basically
Gunnery
it.
officer. Midway was not bad at seakeeping originally. She only had a bad seakeeping reputation after the giant ass refit she got.
Yeah,
Basically, they tried to turn Midway into a forestal by refits,
didn't
and
work.
that's not fair.
It didn't work.
That's not fair, okay?
The
Midway was a
original
very fine
Midways were good.
design. And basically, we're talking about this a similar scenario as this ship called the Mary Rose.
Oh,
As an original
yeah.
naval historian, I regularly have to explain to people she'd been in service for many years before she sank. The original design was very good. However, people kept having bright ideas and adding onto it. And that's probably why she ended up sinking.
Rule number 1: the bright idea fairy is always bad and must be resisted at all costs. That is all.
Rule number 1, Bright Idea Fairy walks in, armed shotgun. Bright Idea Fairy opens mouth, level shotgun. Bright Idea Fairy starts speaking, pull trigger.
Yep.
That's
No,
the
no,
Bright
no,
Idea
Ideas
Fairy.
Fairy has a
Rule
good
4,
idea,
dispose of
and
the
you
body.
change the paradigm of all
Now remind me,
fairy.
Foxo, is it iron shavings as most effective against them usually? Or
Well, if you go off historical against fairies, it should be iron or steel.
Yeah.
But as someone on Tumblr pointed out, in the modern day, it's plastic.
Oh.
Fun.
what? Fae and Fairy.
Anyway, so, Steve Clark, another opinion question for Fleet of Oceans. If Austria agrees to accept the concessions offered by Serbia, how long before someone else does something stupid to start World War One? About 5 minutes, because the Austrians will demand more concessions. The whole point is to get Serbia annexed, either by making concessions that leads to their annexation, or to get them to refuse one demand so the Austrians can kill them. We discussed this at length during the question regarding the Great War. The Austrians...
Yes, but if the Austrians accept the first concessions, that buys time for the Russians to mobilize, and the closer and closer the Russians are actually mobilized, the more the Germans are actually going to start placing some pressure, because again, you have to remember their whole plan was based on the Russians not having time to mobilize. If the Russians are actually fully mobilized before war begins, and everyone's fully mobilized, there are problems. So anything which extends the deadline probably causes them to back down, but it won't be 5 minutes. It'll be about a year for everyone to be calmed down, and then Austria will go in for more concessions.
Yeah.
6 months to a year. Basically, they'll let things mobilize, demobilize, and then after they've demobilized, then they push it up.
What I would
again.
say, Alex, is that's one outcome I would consider. The other one is if the Austrians are very, very quick, as soon as the concession. Because bear in mind, the concessions are rejected, then Austria goes through that horrifically long build-up to prepare to invade. You know, when they're dragging their heels. Now, if they send another demand during this dragging their heels period, which they could have done, then that could also lead to the same outcome as historical. But there is also the option that there's also an entirely likely outcome, as you've just said, where it all quiets down and then flares up 6 months to a year later.
Although that is really, really bad for really, really bad for some nations.
Yep.
Because you add 6 to 12 months onto the British preparation timeline, and
Oh my.
well, I'm just thinking. Let's see.
How cruel are we being to the Germans?
Well, you see, you had. If you consider when the R class are all laid down.
Oh, we're getting all 8 Rs.
They're all laid down. They're all laid down in late 1913, early 1914. They will have been laid down. Agincourt will be along, but also the Royal Navy probably at the end of 1914 has laid down the successor class.
Oh, we get in. Not only are we getting Agincourt, not only are we getting all 8 Rs, we're also getting the follow-on to the QEs.
Which also means we get the admirals, because 2 of the R's don't get converted into Red admirals.
Well, that's the thing is, if it's going to, because let's put it this way: if Agincourt is really is the scenario which me and Drag basically agreed she was going to be small 2 boilers. We disagree as to whether she was going to have 6 18 guns or 15 or 9 15-inch guns is what Drax sometimes thinks puts forward, and that's our disagreement. Either way, whatever comes after her is going to be interesting, because you see, if she's being built and they've got next class laying down, the class they're laying down might be 8 18-inch guns, 28 knot fast battleships. At which point, if any of those get completed in time for what eventually comes a year delayed World War One, yeah, that's going to be worrying.
Our scouting fleet gets hunted.
First scouting fleet gets hunted. In the nicest way, I think that the Germans will be sitting there going, so we've commissioned what? We've commissioned a couple more Bardens. Lovely. And the British have what? 8 Rs, 5 Queen Elizabeths, Agincourt, and that. What's that? The Admirals.
Oh dear.
Okay. And they won't be battle cruisers, they'll be fast battleships.
We have a minor problem, gents. We're in trouble now. Where's my bucket? Bail out.
And also, again, the thing is also, the fun thing that has is longer in war is also small tube boilers, higher pressure boilers, so the British get into start jumping up the pressure of the boilers earlier on, and it has so many consequences. You delay World War One by a year, it has massive consequences. And also, there's the stuff for the British Army, the artillery they're bringing in, the new communication systems,
the new rifles.
World War One not catching the BEF right as it's reorganizing and re-equipping.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's also the fact that the tank project, the British tank program, it owes it. The interesting thing about the British tank program is that there's actually discussions of land ships going on prior to World War One.
Oh god, yeah, there are discussions of tanks in multiple armies and multiple visionaries
Yeah.
presented working prototypes to various nations.
The difference is in the UK, the people discussing it prior to World War One aren't the army.
Navy.
The army's looking at
It's the Navy.
Much more deadly.
The Navy.
The army's looking at
the army's looking at its artillery and all sorts of things, yes, but the Navy is actually is looking into this sort of thing. It's actually sort of pushing along with it with a bit of an idea. So it's a case of the army might not have tanks by the beginning of World War One, but they could certainly have a very heavily organized armored car force to start off World War One, and that could have a big impact on things. If you consider those Rolls-Royce and Bentley armored cars and how capable they were, you have a World War One beginning like it did, but a year later, and you have those in service.
British Army in 1914 are looking at trying to get artillery tractors introduced for the British Army.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about an army which in 1915 could have had armoured cars with heavy machine guns on and artillery tractors in service.
Yeah. And as soon as you have the artillery tractors, change warfare again.
Yes. And with the armoured cars to cover your advances, and also with their machine guns and the sheer amount of fire they bring, they could actually block bridges, race ahead to bridges, block them with the machine guns, infantry come running up in other armoured cars. You've built a 1915 equivalent to the modern Striker Brigade.
Yeah, and then combine that with welcome back, mobile artillery. We've missed you a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which means you suddenly get
suddenly
stuff
Belgium might not fall, and the Germans might be facing a counterattack through Belgium.
Yeah, suddenly you don't have pack howitzers. You have full-scale howitzers and artillery pieces that can move with the infantry. that alone's an existential issue for the German army.
Yeah.
It's not about how big it is; it's how you use it.
Oh, it is. And let's be honest, the armored cars and infantry mounted them would be used for they would have been given to the dragoon. They'd have been given to dragoon units, mounted infantry, and they'd have used it exactly like that.
So I was looking at introducing integrated radio vehicles for the artillery.
Yeah.
Right, so, next question. YouTube Minecraft Watcher. What if on September 1st, 1939, all British carriers, old and new, suddenly become multi-class carriers? That's a very happy Royal Navy right there. That's a very happy
We've also
Royal
had
Navy
that.
right there.
I feel like we've had that
That's
question
also the
in
nicest.
the last month or so.
I think we have, but I would say, and also that's also Royal Navy, which, if you consider Courageous and a torpedo she takes, a multi-class wouldn't get hit, wouldn't get sunk. She would survive those torpedo hits. And in the nicest way, if you're changing Argus, Hermes, all these ships to these carriers, there's a lot of planes the fleet air needs to get from somewhere. But you know how if they're going to get them, they're probably going to have to buy American. In which case, they're probably buying a huge number of aircraft from America.
Yep.
At that, if it's 1939. At that point, but they have enough aircraft they can fill out those carriers. But if it's all the carriers in 1939, Ark Royal becomes a multi-class, Courageous, Glorious, Furious all become multi-class, Hermes, Argus, all Eagle, all multi-classes. That's 7 multis.
That's a lot of Maltas. And that's a lot of flight decks.
Well, no, now think about it in terms of the Mediterranean campaign, in terms of Taranto. Think about what a Malta class HMS Eagle will do to Taranto.
Yeah.
Well, the number of swordfish she could be carrying, and skewers.
You think you'd
One
have
of
the
a fighter, the one
Illustrious
who's gonna
finished?
The Illustrious would still be being finished because they're being built at this point, but and so you'd probably still have HMS Illustrious along, because they're going to be available. They're going to be carriers, but it's basically okay, we've got all these Maltas. That's great. We also have these Illustrious classes as basically second line carriers. Actually, what's the exact wording on the question?
The exact wording was, what if on September 1st, 1939, all British carriers, old and new, suddenly become multi-class carriers? That's the exact wording, word for word.
HMS Illustrious was launched on April 1939.
Oh my.
So I'm just going for old and new. Basically, once they're launched, we consider them carriers, right? So if we consider Formidable is also launched in August 1939, which date in September 1939?
Literally
First.
September 1st.
Okay, so only Victorious and Indomitable are launched after September the 1st, 1939.
Which means that gives them...
So the Royal Navy has 9 Maltas.
Nice.
Okay, I've got to ask a question though. Which carrier would stand better in a battle line? A Malta?
They'd be about the same. The Malta still has the 4.5s.
Yeah, a Malta
still has the
or
4.5.
Implacable. Or not Implacable.
You mean Indomitable, the one that matter of fact.
Indomitable. Yeah, Indomitable.
For me, they become the same. They still have the same 4.5s. They have the same things. But the biggest advantage they're going to bring is the radars and the other systems they're going to produce. You're talking about getting a carrier which is 47.5, nearly 50,000 tons, and it's nearly 60,000 tons in deep load.
Here's a question for them.
They would be carrying 100 or so aircraft in a probably 90. It would probably be the British would go with the theoretical 90 loadout, which they'd been working out, which would have been let's see, did it go? I think it in the theoretical, if I remember correctly, off the top of my head, it was 36 swordfish, 36 skewers, and 18 fighters. Which is 90 aircraft.
Would the Royal Navy actually or would the Fleet Air Arm actually have enough planes to fully man these carriers?
Immediately, no.
Immediately, no, but they would definitely have enough swordfish they could call upon.
Put a tailhook on a ferry battle.
I was going to say, also, could they use this to basically say, hey, look, we need the funding. Look at these carriers we've now got.
Yes.
Well, that would also be the case, but also there's the fact is they would just go in nicest way. The Royal Navy started the process of going to order from America earlier than anyone else did. In this scenario, they basically turn around to the government and go, "If you don't want us to fight us, we need to fill out these aircraft carriers with aircraft. Give us a check, and we'll go off to America, because that's where they can go and buy them from." So honestly, you're probably seeing. Historically, the British didn't buy Buffaloes for their fighter aircraft because that was the ones the US Navy selected. So they were the ones who went for Wildcats and things. So basically, probably the Royal Navy gets maybe an earlier version of the Wildcat.
Yeah, they'll probably go for the one with. They'll probably get because the martlets that the RN eventually got in historically were the 6-gun martlets. They never operated the 4-gun F4F. Whereas now, they're probably going to be the first F4F customer, and they're going to receive lots of the 450 cal version, which is still decent.
They're still going to crash order.
450 cal is still nasty.
You probably end up with air groups of roughly 18 full Mars, 18 of those Wildcats, or Martlets as they might call them, 18 skewers, and the remaining aircraft will either be albacores or swordfish, depending on the time period you're talking about. And that's a pretty nasty air group.
Is the Malta's Miles
for 1930?
The Maltas
they're going to have British fighter direction control still.
And of course they are.
And that's still going to go for development.
And of course there's also the fact that
Dash 3.
If you get
the Dash 3
carry on, Mo.
The Dash 3 Wildcats didn't come out testing until February of 1940. You don't really have
but that's probably going to fit no, that's going to fit the British going and ordering, because it sounds weird, Mo. They are going to be ordering, expecting to take delivery in 1940.
Okay.
They're not going to order. It's not going to. In a nice way, in 1939, before Italy joins the war, they don't really need it.
Yeah, and also if they need to fill flight decks,
when Italy joins the war, then they need it.
Yeah, and if they need to pull flight decks, they can pull Nimrods out of storage to make up squadron numbers if they need to.
Sea Gladiators, they've got lots of them.
Yeah,
they've got lots of Sea Gladiators.
You don't pull out the You do everything you can to not pull out the Nimrods.
I know, but like I say,
Sea Gladiators at least have a small hope.
I won't take a Nimrod into World War One. Never mind.
Basically, in 1939, they're going to be Sea Gladiators, Swordfish, Full Mars and Skewers, and Albacores coming in. And it's only in early 1940 they're going to go, okay, right then. Oh, if Italy's joined the war, right then, we need a better fighter. Let's go get it. And that's going to be when they're going to go for hunting for the Wildcats, probably, because that's the option. Because that's the carrier-based fighter you can go and grab. And it's going to be the big problem I can see in this scenario is if you've got all the little carriers upgraded to this size as well, then suddenly Britain has a surfeit of carriers to do operations with. Because if you think about it, if Britain now has 9 Maltas, you can have 3 sitting in the North Atlantic operating from Scapa Flow. There is the scenario, of course, you could worry about, again, the glorious scenario, but the thing about the Malta class is they were supposed to be 33¼ knot ships. And again, they're going to carry more aircraft. And again, if you haven't lost Courageous, with their if they're available and they appear with their radars, you're going to see the Germans coming. That's the thing. Even if you haven't got aircraft airborne, even if the captain's doing what he was historically, you're going to have radar, which will ping off and tell you where the Germans are, and you could go to 33.25 knots. Or even up to 33 knots. And let's be honest, the Scharnhorsts, as good as they are, I think... Well, they are 31-knot ships. So maybe they can push that a bit higher, but so it can make it a 33-knot carrier. But either way, they're not closing. The gap's not closing.
Yep. Gunnery Officer asks, question 4, what if the US and the United Nations somehow did not respond to the North Korean invasion of the South in fear of escalation with the PRC and the USSR? How would a unified Korea be like in the post-invasion? Well, there's a really easy way to have that happen. It's really, really easy. The Russians are actually sitting in the Security Council and use their veto power. There is no UN intervention.
I wouldn't say that's
force.
easy, but
it is a really quick way to have it happen. But assuming there's no UN,
yes, but then you have to have the
intervention
reason. But then you have to deal with the whole reason of why Russia currently was not there, and you have to all of a sudden change that to making Russia actually be present, which means you have to change the reasons why, which, as I recall, was due to China.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff for that relatively quick and easy fix. There's a hell of a lot of back works have to be done.
I mean, we could just ignore it.
I mean,
State of the question.
wait, you've got to get the Soviets to pull their heads out of their asses.
For the sake of the question, it just says somehow. I'm just going with they've decided to veto it. Let's just go with that for the sake of the question.
I'd have said the easiest way would be they did go in the intervention and they were pushed out.
Yeah.
If the
So the
intervention
North Koreans managed to pop their Busan perimeter
The Busan perimeter.
That's
Yeah.
not really
The-
possible.
before
North
the
Koreans
Americans
don't
can
have
get there.
They don't have the strength. They're running out.
It's
of
enough to make
steel.
it tactically unviable. Like, they can inflict enough casualties if they do some rather dangerous things.
So, assuming that basically the
But
war is
either way.
over and there was one Korea, basically depends on if the Kim dynasty reasserts control or if it doesn't. Because the Kim dynasty becoming a feudal monarchy is something that is enabled by the loss of the Korean War. If they've won, the transition from communist state to feudal monarchy is not
Can still happen.
Not really. Not in the same way.
It can.
Not really.
Korea's internal power structure at this time is what facilitates it.
Yes, but only with the zeitgeist of the loss, the eternal loss of the Korean War, and the way in which it enabled the Kim dynasty to purge certain rivals exceptionally easily, and avoid it actually being a communist state, even like the Soviet Union or Vietnam. He's not going to have the same leverage post a successful
He will.
victory. No, he won't.
He will, because he's won a war against America and succeeded.
Yes, but he doesn't have the. He's not the great leader Kim Il Sung at this point. He's just the leader of Korea, who is called Kim Il Sung in the north. The whole great
Yeah, and he
leadership-
becomes the great leader by winning the war.
No, he becomes the great leader by Korea surviving against all odds. If it's a short, sharp victory,
Yeah,
Korea's
yeah,
just been reunified. He's not going to have the same cult of personality, and he's got too many.
Oh, he
rivals
is.
for him to.
He's
He
just
is.
completed. He's just managed to achieve, Korean unification. He's going to have the same cult of personality, if not even bigger, because the cult of personality is mostly propaganda. Okay, so you've got a "we survived against all odds" mantra to start off your propaganda. That's good. You can do stuff with that. We, against all odds, unified our nation under one great leader and one party
drove
to
out.
become the true Korea. Yeah.
We drove out the American occupiers. We drove out the Japanese.
Yeah,
Won Korea.
I suppose.
And it's not like South Korea has the institution, the power and institutions at this time to stop him consolidating power.
Hmm.
I mean, it's two dictators at the current moment in 1948.
I mean, if-
What's that? Wait.
I was just saying, it's two dictators basically.
Yeah.
There wasn't any sort of government. There wasn't any sort of government system in place, or an institution that can resist the North. It's basically the same institution.
Yeah, so there's very much not much in the South that can resist him. They wouldn't be able to
Problem is,
resist him
though,
in the
how do
North.
you? Well, the thing is, how do you justify a state of total war and imposed famine if there's no threat? Where's the threat?
Because America's the threat.
Because the
A
evil people who would
revanchist
break
America-
Korea apart are the threat.
Yeah, a revanchist America that's occupying Japan that wants revenge on Korea and to break it apart again and to break the people's
Also,
liberation.
China, Japan, Russia, they're all threats depending on your circumstance. That's
Mhm.
one of the reasons
Change the
potentially
narrative.
that I've often seen argued for China is that, you know, a united Korea actually becomes a problem for them to deal with.
And they got the Sino-Soviet split. Well, one of the big communist powers is going to become the enemy.
Yeah, probably the Chinese, because the Chinese didn't. Because in this scenario, the Chinese haven't helped, whereas the Russians did. In this Korean War, the Chinese will not have helped because they won't have intervened because the war never was pushed back to the Yalu River, whereas the Russians will have had MiG-15s and advisors. So it's very clear which way Korea is going to lean.
Oh no, the biggest
Not
thing
really.
for Russia is the veto.
It's a case of it depends how Russia and the Chinese treat this new communist United Korea. Because if they're Soviet aligned, remember the Chinese are having the border conflicts with the Soviets in the 60s. So if the Soviet aligned, they've got a massive border with China.
It's just a question
And
of how well Kim takes to Mao's social or Mao's reforms, basically.
Well, the Kim Dynasty is they will they'll run North Korea as they have done. Like it'll be militarily powerful, but the people will be starving, and short of an intervention, it'll be
Horrific.
yeah.
Just like the other communist countries at the time.
And I mean, Korea may actually attempt to do something monumentally stupid, but on their own hubris, like building up a navy and attacking Japan. It's the Kim Dynasty high on victory after the Korean War. I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, but they're not stupid.
No,
It-
they have
it's
much
like,
bigger issues to worry, mostly to the north. But yeah,
and it's like,
Yeah.
I hate this narrative that dictators are stupid. They're not.
They're not.
If
Oh,
they're
hang on.
stupid,
Let
they
me
would be in position.
redline it. There is Mussolini, but other than that, usually they're not. Mussolini is also not always stupid. He wasn't always stupid. He just could make some really silly decisions. And the same with Hitler. They're human. They're not stupid. They're human. And
like
they
you
fall
have to
victim
be-
to their own hubris more often than not.
You have
but
to be smart to get to those positions.
yeah.
You could call them incompetent.
They're
I
like
know.
some like I have fun with some of my colleagues who in academia who are very, very smart in their areas of expertise, and then they start commenting on other areas of expertise, and you sit there and go, just because you're smart in one area doesn't necessarily make you good at another. And a lot of those dictators are very smart at politics and able to get themselves in a position of power where they have the power. They're just not smart in actually running the show once they're there.
Well, I would argue they are. They just see it. That they just operate through a different lens
Okay.
because their mechanisms of power are inherently different to, say, a democratic society.
You're talking about how they're running it so that they retain personal power and authority rather than setting up a system which is actually a sensible organization, because that might be a threat to their authority.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Right. So, Tube Minecraft Watcher asks, what if in September 1st, 1939, all British battleships and battlecruisers become a post-modernization Admiral class? Basically what Hood would have become. Well, that's terrifying for all of Britain's
I am
enemies.
Speed!
Well, that's just terrifying for all of Britain's enemies.
That solves a lot of British
Although the
issues.
British will probably miss Nelson and Rodney.
Likely, but if all your battleships are suddenly, modified admirals, then Scharnhorst and Gneisenau don't want to leave their port at all.
Yeah, post-modernization admirals, they've basically been given their fleet's entirely proto-Vanguard at this point.
And just basically,
you
keep
could
four of the admirals in the home fleet, and the rest can go and find the Mediterranean.
Fleet, can you stop this one with the modified admiral being a proto-Vanguard? Because an admiral-class battlecruiser, as it starts out more from the Dreadnought armored cruiser line than Tiger. Vanguard takes the cue from Tiger's design history, not the admirals. The admirals are modified post-Jutland to be battlecruiser one words, but they were never built as that.
Yes.
So the thing is, in the nicest way, if you think about some of the battles that British end up fighting during World War II, whilst yes, they have strength and capability, and you suddenly have all these guns and all these fast ships. That's very useful in so many ways. It is also going to cause you a trouble, because if you consider the Bismarck scenario, you've now got battle cruisers taking on a fast battleship in a fight.
I mean, the post-modernization admiral
And modernized. And what's the post-modernization admirals going to do about their subdivision internally? Is it going to increase their armor coverage one bit in terms of real terms plate coverage other than air defense protection?
Probably not. But
It's going to give them better fire control and radars, but is it going to actually mean that you want to go in a toe-to-toe fight with a fast battleship?
If there's two of them against Bismarck, yes, I'd absolutely take that engagement.
If you've got more fast capital ships, you can bring more of the admirals with you. Instead of just two admirals, you could bring the admirals.
Just keep forward the home fleet and have everybody else run the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's a case of...
What about escorting the convoys, which the Arza class are doing?
Well, you can use...
What's going to take over that role?
Admiral.
An admiral?
Because it's there. And
really?
Yeah.
All your battleships are turned into admirals, right?
So now, well, that's lovely, but now you've timed down a ship which depends on speed for its ability to decide combat, and now it has to go slowly because it has to defend a convoy.
Well, yes, that's...
Yes, but what is defending a convoy from?
And
either it's a match for, or it's going to split off to engage on its own terms.
Oh, so then it's going to do the scenario which we had versus Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, where one came up, tried to get the R-Class to chase it off, because the R-Class couldn't chase it, didn't chase it, so when the other one came up, it was there to block it.
I mean, I think...
Yeah.
Just the point I'm trying to make is, just because you are very excited to have faster ships, they are less armored, and being faster doesn't necessarily give you the strategic options you want. It actually, in a nice way, causes you trouble as well. It doesn't solve all problems, it causes you different problems.
But I'm sure they're unable quite happily to trade a convoy to sink one of the Scharnhorst.
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. Because which is strategic? Which is more important for Britain, getting the supplies through, or for Britain getting the supplies through, of that convoy. Because if it's a convoy which is being escorted by a battleship, is that a regular convoy?
No. Well,
So that's going to be one of the important convoys. It's very rare. Only the special convoys get the battleship escort from Halifax. So that's not a convoy you want to lose.
Yeah.
It's
still
basically the thing is you have if you look, the thing is, if you were said you were going to replace them all with 15-inch armed Tigers, I'd be with you, because the subdivision and armor coverage on a Tiger and how it's built actually makes it a more survivable ship than an Admiral. But the Admiral, as a design, owes far too much to the Invincible class lineage for me to be happy with it. And this is why when people start going, oh, it's a fast battleship, it's not. It's a battle cruiser 2 words, which has been barely modified to become a battle cruiser 1 word. And even modernization, unless you're going to strip the ship down and redo the subdivision and increase armor coverage over all of the ship's hull, is not going to turn into anything like a Proto Vanguard, which is a fully armored battle cruiser. And again, I will remind people before they go, Vanguard was de facto a fast battleship. It wasn't. You know how I know this? Because the Royal Navy was building the King George V's and the Lions, both of which were fast battleship designs. And they don't call the Vanguard a fast battleship.
Then why did they call it?
So if they literally are building something called... that was a political choice, because the Iowas were fast battleships, so it sounded better if she was. But she was always technically designed as a fast battleship. She was technically built and designed as a fully armored battle cruiser. They just changed the name for politics. It's like Churchill decided that the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were battle cruisers because it allowed him to not build the King George V's. When they are fast battleships. They've got 11-inch guns because that's all the Germany could build at the time.
I presume in this scenario, though, Britain's now probably going, yeah, no, while these are nice to have, get us battleships as yesterday, sort of thing.
Yeah, the King George V's are going to be being built as quickly as possible.
And the Lions.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the ships that they've got can do the job.
Because also, do you want to take an Admiral versus a Yamato? Even modernized Admiral?
No.
Well, no.
No.
Well, no, I wouldn't.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to take anything the Royal Navy's Admiral against the Yamato.
Would you want to take an Admiral up against a Littorio?
Depends on the circumstances.
I am more happy
I'm more
with the
happy.
fight, but I still don't want that fight.
Yeah, it depends on the circumstances.
No. And do you want to take three Admirals up against a pair of Littorios?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Actually, in that one, I would be more okay. Especially if I can bring some cruiser support.
Yeah, if that's a fleet engagement where one side
Well, then,
Littorios,
the Italians also have their cruiser support with them and their fleet with them.
Yeah, that's a fight the British are going to win. It's 3 admirals with modernized fire control, and yes, the armor's a little bit weak, but it's the Littorios. It doesn't matter how much armor you have. The 15-inch gun of the Littorio does not care. But it's 3-on-2. And at that point,
I could almost
number
feel
of-
Dr. Clark's disapproving glare.
the higher number of barrels is going to work in your favor.
It is, but
How many
also
barrels does Littorio have?
9.
9.
So 2 of them is 8.
And how many does it? Yeah, and so it's 18 versus 24.
Mm-hmm.
However,
huge of a
think about
difference.
this. If you're doing a faster engagement, if you're heading towards them, you could be in a scenario where it's 12 versus 18.
Possible. That is a possibility that could occur. But what if you? But again, to
And
on its head, what if you?
I would point out that regularly, if we consider the first Battle of Sirte, where the British didn't even have any battleships at the time, the Italians produced 4 battleships. They had Andrea Dorio, Littorio, and Giulio there.
Well then,
And the British usually only have about 3.
well at that point.
And whilst, yes, you're going... you're running, but you know.
But at that point, aren't we comparing events that happen with the R class that were to event replacing an R class equivalent with a renown? Or with an admiral.
Well, no, you're replacing the Renowns, you're replacing the Warspite and the Queen Elizabeths, you're replacing all the R's, you're replacing Nelson and Rodney, all with one class of ship. And if you think about how these ships are used through World War II, they are all doing different functions and spread around those various functions.
Yeah, but I mean, I would consider the Admirals a direct upgrade to Renown and Repulse at least.
They are definitely an upgrade to Renown and Pulse. I will not argue with that. But that's because Renown and Pulse are Jackie Fisher degrading the whole process because of after Tiger. If you consider Tiger displaces more than Renown and Repulse by a hefty margin. Renan, you are coming through. You sound like you're talking to us from inside a golf club.
So I'd also consider the modernized admirals to be a superior asset than the R class unmodernized. At least.
In some ways superior, in some ways not. As convoy escort, I'd say they're not as good. As convoy escort, I'd say they're almost a problem because they can go off chasing they could be tempted to go chasing the enemy.
Yeah. But as ships, they're better ships. That's what I'm trying to establish.
Well, yes, but the R class actually have a better armor layout as they were built than the Queen Elizabeth class did. So that's the interesting. The R's are far better designed to take damage than the Queens.
So, next question. YouTube Minecraft Watcher. What if in February 1940 all British Spitfires become Mark 24s?
That's scary.
The RAF screams and cries.
Basically.
They scream and cry, but also they've now just got the most advanced Spitfire variant ever produced.
Yeah,
The
they
RAF screams and
Yes.
cries because they can't fuel them.
They can.
Exactly.
The fuel is going to be
it's
going to be a nightmare to get enough for them and keep it in stock. But also, the other problem that the RF is going to have is suddenly they are going to be having to introduce a whole generation of pilots immediately to the sound barrier.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also these are metal construct over fabric, as I recall.
And forgive me if I'm wrong, alright, but the Mark 24 uses the light wall further increased octane fuel for high altitude.
I don't know if Griffin would start on a 87 octane because in February of 1940 you're not finding a lot of 100 octanes around in Britain.
Yeah, because I thought the Griffins are 105 octane.
No,
At minimum.
the Griffins run 150.
Yeah, so fuck 100. Yeah, sorry, 150, not 100. Yeah, 150. So you won't be able to fuel them, that's the issue.
You could fuel them, the engine will choke really badly, and you're gonna have to move up the maintenance schedule and just declog them after maybe a couple 100 hours of flight instead of a couple thousand.
With a top speed of 441 miles per hour, I'm fairly certain there are going to be a lot of Germans very, very scared. The 2 20mm cannon, the 4 303s, or...
No, 24s are quads.
Oh, no, Mark
Quad
5s
cannon,
in
aren't
the
they?
early
Yeah.
war.
These are 421 Mark 5s.
I guess there's the
These are
other
Mark
issue.
5s. These actually work.
These are the best Hispano you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
That's the other issue. Good luck finding enough Hispano ammo to even field a single squadron.
Honestly, the Hispano ammo is
1940.
probably not as much of an issue. It'll definitely
No,
be
the
an issue in
Hispano
the
ammo's
short term,
not
but you can
much
get that
fun.
produced.
You can spool it up, but yeah.
Basically, you've given when's it coming?
Okay, so actually, yeah.
February of 1940.
So the
Oh, you've
Griffin
got enough time before the Battle of Britain begins to sort it out. Because
Also,
the Battle of Britain
these
doesn't
en-
begin until July, so you'll have sorted out by then.
Also, I did just check. These actually are 100 octane engines.
You could run 100 octane,
yeah.
but like I said, the problem is getting the 100 octanes because
Yeah, but it's
most
more
of
a
the
case
100
of
octanes is
it's a case. I'm more saying that's better than having to get the 150 octane,
yes.
which they do
I'm
use
actually
later.
more-
But
Can I say I'm actually more worried about the 5-bladed propeller and maintaining that?
Yeah. Because what February of 1940, most Spitfires it was still using the twin blade wooden ones, weren't they?
no, that was only like the earliest Mark ones.
Yeah, but
Yes,
the
you're
new
looking at the
3-blade
three-bladed
didn't
one.
get introduced until
These are.
a little
I'm
bit
pretty
later.
I'm pretty sure these are mostly the 3 blades by this point, because
Yeah.
as I recall, it is an extremely limited number of Spitfires get the 2 blade.
Because
This
the
is
two
changing
blades
all
have been
Spitfires or all
completed.
Spitfires and Hurricanes?
Just Spitfires.
See though, there's
Well, then you're okay. You got the Hurricanes to give you cover until you've got all the stuff sorted out for the Spitfires.
there's the problem isn't that the Griffins won't take 87. It is the fact that the Griffins are designed to operate with 150 as its limit. You could operate 100 to try to extend their service life, but if you start running 87 octane, that's starting to get into really lean mixtures, and the engine is just gonna choke really hard on that. It will technically fly. The engine is not gonna like it for long.
And the engine ain't going to give you much power.
Yes. And that's gonna cause a completely different issue with, a bigger Spitfire airframe and a bigger engine. It's just the power and weight gets really,
Actually,
really
I don't think the
fucking-
frame's that much bigger.
No, but it's heavier.
It-
That's
it's-
the issue.
Yeah,
It's
it's
heavier,
much
but
heavier.
overall, in terms of actual physical dimensions, it's about the same.
It's about like
But it's
10%
also
bigger,
about the
but that isn't
reinforced
the
wing
issue.
spars.
It's heavier. That's the issue. If you're running a choked out engine, so lower horsepower on a heavier airframe, you're not getting the power to weight or thrust to weight, and that's not. There could be a chance where if you're running that choked out of an engine on a heavy airframe, you might actually be better having
Leslie's
earlier
pointing out Griffins
Spitfires.
do have an 87 octane mode, so they are, and from what I can find, they are right that 100 octane is the standard, 150 is high performance, 87 is a setting that is available by default on certain engines. So, and that if that gives these what's called 1700 horsepower, is that, or is that? Yeah, 1700 horsepower. That is enough to keep them going.
Yes, it is.
You'll
And-
still want to try and get that 100 octane as soon as you can.
But it's
Which-
not as big an overmatch as you would want.
Yes,
Given
and to be
Yeah.
fair,
Get
the
it, you
100
have it by-
octane.
yeah.
Yeah,
You have by July 1940.
Yeah.
You have the 100 octane by July 1940.
Also, to be honest, it is that big of a gap. If you've got Hispano Mark V's against early 109s that you're going up against,
kill death.
this is not a
It-
fair fight.
it's a kill, but you don't have complete basically maneuver impunity like you would have if you had the 150 octane.
Now, of course, the other problem is if you're only replacing the Spitfires, the early Spitfire with a Griffin with the Mark 24s, you run into the issue of that actually isn't a lot of Mark 24s you have.
Well, it's
You
all
still-
Spitfires currently available at the date, but even then, that's still
It's not a
Only
lot.
like
It's like
1,000?
3. Yeah. I don't think they have 1,000 by February. I think they have a
I
little
think
less.
they've definitely got 1,000 production lines at least. So I guess if we include production line, but yeah,
I
either way, yeah,
don't know.
it's not.
You're still mostly relying on
massive.
Hurricanes
Yeah,
for the actual battle. It's just that the
Also,
Spitfires now get to have fun and just be like untouchable by any of the German fighters.
These Spitfires become your planes of right. This is an area we need to make sure we can either defend or attack, or this is basically a special operation zone that we need to be able to win.
Yeah. Whereas.
Yeah.
whereas
Now
the-
let's just
whereas-
hope that
You first.
let's just hope they don't get sent to Lee Bell and Mallory.
Yeah.
Also, it's going to be interesting because these have the.
Dragon,
Go on.
can I
Go ahead.
whereas you've got the Hurricanes and Spitfire 1s and 2s that are still being built, they will be going into general purpose squadrons to re-bulk out the RAF. And the aircraft, and I guarantee you that a lot of the aircraft they have, there will be some spares donors broken up to provide spares for the rest of the fleet.
No. No. You can't really break these up. If you break these up, they're not going back together.
Yeah, that's the whole point of a spares donor.
No, as in the spares don't go back on the other plane.
Yeah. Fleet. The only thing the Mark 24s have in
Like-
common with their old counterparts
Not even that.
from Battle of Britain is the fact they're the same general
Well,
shape.
Also, he's more meaning,
Yeah.
no, Fox, what he more means is in you break some of these Mark 24s up to keep the other Mark 24s running. And the answer is you probably don't.
But why not?
I don't
even-
think you can.
The parts are very specifically made at this point, Fleet. And also, the only thing you can really do this to, basically, will be stuff like the hydraulics. You don't want to touch those engines. Like, you might, at most, you might take apart some of them to see how the engine ticks. But,
The Griffin is wizardry at
gonna-
this point.
yeah.
Not really.
It's not wizardry,
not.
but it's more a case of this is a much more advanced engine
It's already.
than what we're looking at.
The thing is, the Griffin is already under development at this point because the Royal
Yeah.
Navy's already placed their order as of 1939 for the 2,000 horsepower engines.
Yeah.
So the Royal
Yeah.
Navy's, the Griffin, etc., is already well under development thanks to the Navy. So basically, what you probably do is have one or two of these broken up and hand it over to the people developing the Griffin.
The Rolls Royce.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the issue is that the Griffins.
Well, specific team with Rolls Royce.
the
and
Griffins
go-
are-
I want this, and I want it built now.
The key big thing is they now have access to a two-stage, two-speed supercharger in 1940.
Yeah.
I want to throw them the metallurgy of the streamlined Griffin.
Which pretty much means that you probably will not see a Mark V variant of a Spitfire. Or at
The-
least
the
the Mark
point
V
I
would
always
look more
make
like a
was,
Mark 9.
The point I always make about the stuff produced in World War II is the theory was always worked out well before World War II. It's just turning into practicality was what was happening in World War II.
Yeah.
So they've got the theory. If they've got a practical example, they can probably start building it fairly quickly. They would probably take. Would they get it done within 6 months? If they've got it in February, how far along are they? They could be building Griffin engines of not quite the same standard, but good enough standard that they could work in that type of airframe and provide them with 95% of the power output, probably by about August.
I wouldn't say it's that quick.
No, notice I said 90% of the output, not 100% of the output. So basically, you can have something which is a viable version by about August, but getting that last 10% is going to take another year to 18 months.
But it's
Because you think about it, you can use that as a guide with what you're working on to develop what you're working on and get it better more quickly.
I've just been worried about the miniaturization that goes on with the Griffin. Towards by the time it gets into the Mark 24.
No, look at some of the work they've done on the Schneider engines and some of the engines they put in the Schneider aircraft. They worked on miniaturization before, just not at scale.
Yeah.
So they understand how to do it. It's understanding to do it at scale, and that's going to be the issue.
I think that's why it would take longer.
I think that's why I say I reckon they could get it to a 90% version by August. I don't think they could get to a 100% version for a long time, but I reckon they could get to a 90% version.
It's mostly down to metallurgy things.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I
the
get
metallurgy stuff had mostly been worked out.
Like the team would
Just hadn't
probably
been
understand.
implemented.
Yeah, the team would probably be like, "Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand how this part works, but I don't understand how it functions or how this was created." Sort of deal.
It would be it'd be more a case of, they would be looking at going, well, this is we conceptualized this, we hadn't yet built this, we're working on this version of ideas. This is a working version of one of those ideas. Okay, how have they got to here, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the scenario you're dealing with.
It will nudge them in the right
Because
direction.
basically you're giving the team who will actually end up developing that engine the completed article of what they'd end up developing to see early in the process, and that's the point. They could achieve, I think, a 90% version, because if you consider how good the Griffin, in terms of the Griffin engine, is actually is being worked and being tested as a working version remarkably early in its construction. Remarkably early. You know, its first run in November 1939, and it was started work in 1938 from the Fleet Air Arm. It's basically when the orders and everything had gone through, and so you have got something. If you've already got running versions. Okay, they're the early, not so good versions in November 1939. You've already been doing that testing, doing that refinement, and then suddenly in February 1940, you get about 4 or 5 examples to tear apart of working advanced versions. You've got a basis to build from.
Yep.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but Moe, have they transitioned to the aluminium in the engine blocks yet? Or does that come later in the Griffins? Because
I don't recall them going to aluminium.
Because I swear they went to an aluminium alloy, or is that post-war?
I don't.
No, they
did.
They did that quite early on in the design process. The 12 cylinders are housed in two two-piece cylinder blocks of cast aluminium. They're a cast aluminium alloy with separate heads and skirts, and that was done quite early in the process from what I'm seeing in my notes.
Okay, 'cause
Right.
I remember reading that they transitioned between several more and more advanced alloys throughout the war.
Oh god, I am gonna have to do a catch-up ramblings this week.
So my question
You possibly are.
is,
Probably are.
would the issue be metallurgical? Because these are late war to post-war Griffins.
It's not metal. The aluminium alloy was being used as early as the Griffin 2B. Okay, it's not quite the same alloy that's in the Griffin. It's an improved alloy, but if they're still using the aluminium alloy in the earlier Griffins and the earlier Griffin engines. So I would say it's a case of, again, it's the 90%. You won't have the 100%, but you'll have something which is about 90% as good. You won't be able to produce a Mark 24 Spitfire, but you'll be able to produce something which is a facsimile of the Mark 24, if you know what I mean.
So a cheap knockoff.
Yeah. And 90% as good. But let's be honest, if you can build a 90% as good Mark 24 in 1940,
Oh boy.
you're not in exactly a bad scenario.
No.
Oh god,
Right.
does that mean we get mosquitoes with Griffin engines?
Right.
Well, yes, but also think about this: if you're shifting over entirely to Griffin production in the middle of 1940, which you could be doing in this scenario, then it's there's also something else which could get the Griffin.
The Lang?
Well, think about when the Ferry Fulmar is ordered.
Mhm.
And the big problem for the Fulmar was that they had 1,300 horsepower engines for the Mark IIs, let alone the original Marks. Imagine them with a 1,900 horsepower engine. And
Wait,
also,
does this mean
instead of a three-bladed propeller, a five-bladed propeller.
More
Wait, does this-
importantly, two-stage
is this-
supercharger.
In this time, do we
Yeah.
get a working Firebrand then? If they actually have the engines to get it working?
Well, that's
I
the
think
thing.
Firebrand
You're
is-
jumping the
Firebrand's
engine development on.
like-
on the,
But, they're
the
gone.
Firebrand is, you just see what happens with this engine, and also imagine what Packard do with a Griffin.
To be fair, putting a
Imagine
Griffin
a
on
Griffin
blade,
powered Packard, a Packard Griffin powered Mustang.
that airframe's gonna need a lot of reworking to take that extra power, but yeah.
It's gonna take reworking, but you will do the reworking with a smile on your face and a song in your heart.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is it enough to kill off the radials then earlier?
No. That's just
No,
that's just
because
a,
radials
that-
are very reliable.
Yeah, that's just a US thing. You can't get the US off of radios.
Yeah. Right. So, next question.
How many questions do we have tonight? Because I know you were saying you're going to have to do a.
Yeah, I can't.
Oh,
I
goody.
can't get through all of that in 10 minutes. The oh, I'm gonna have to say it. The Rizzler asks.
Okay.
If another
Have
Go
you
on,
been
please.
rizzled?
Go on.
if another
Go
Chinese
Have you been
faction
rizzled?
that isn't the communists won the ensuing civil war after World War II, would Sino-American relations still break down? No. If the if the nationalists win, the nationalists will basically become, well, actually, it will actually work in reverse. It'll be unlike, so as we know in history, Sino-Soviet relations broke down after World War II, then warmed significantly during the Sino-Soviet split up into the 90s, and then have cooled since then as China sees America more of a rival than a partner. Whereas it would very much be the reverse in this case. You'd have very warm Chinese relations in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Then as China really asserts itself as a manufacturing power, it would move to see America as a rival rather than a partner.
Not necessarily, because you still have communist Russia to its north and border
Yeah.
disputes. So in a nicest way, you probably have a version
I wasn't
of maybe
done.
even you do have the. You
wasn't-
might even have what I call POTO.
Yeah, I wasn't done. I was only halfway through.
Okay. All right,
well-
Karen.
But that won't be enough to break the powers apart. However, I see that all radically changing after the collapse of the Soviet Union. China will see itself as the only other great power aside from the US still standing, and at that point, though it will be a different form of rivalry to that between the Chinese and the US nowadays, because it will be purely it'll be a great power rivalry rather than an ideological one, which to some extent the current China-US rivalry is.
I don't know.
Because
There
I
are
just put it
fundamental issues with the nationalist government system that may or may not prevent the Chinese nation building progression to progress as rapidly as the communists did in the 60s and 70s.
And you're also assuming a pro-Western China.
I'm not at all. I'm assuming a China that's willing to work with the West in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and maybe the 70s while it's rebuilding and nation building. And a China that becomes more and more anti-Western and more independent through the 80s, 90s, and especially in the 2000s after the fall of the USSR.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, but even like a lot of the non-communist Chinese factors had a habit of being very isolationist and very anti-Western.
Yes.
But if you have a choice between Russia, which keeps trying to occasionally reorganize your border, and the West, who are happy to support you to stop Russia reorganizing your border and keep Russia focused on Asia, which do you pick?
The Chinese know fundamentally there will be a time and a place, especially watching the collapse in power of powers who own various treaty ports, the French and the British and the Portuguese. The Chinese will know full well there will come a time and a place to redress those issues later. But that can be done later.
I'd say it depends how the power struggles pay out. Because nationalists aren't known to be the most sane when it comes to this sort of thing.
Fundamentally speaking, the problem with the nationalist government is just the horrendous internal corruption that really was a carryover from the previous government system. This is a nation that never had a chance to really nation build, and it was just a lot of internal power struggles for 40, 50 years since, the existence of the previous government. We really don't know how the nationalist government would develop if they win the Civil War, simply because we don't know what Chiang Kai-shek would actually do. There are too much question marks on this issue for us to determine whether if China would actually develop into a nice, proper, first world country with the support of Western material and, open global trade, that kind of stuff like that, or it might still just collapse back into more political infighting, either with people either hating Chiang Kai-shek or just Chiang Kai-shek goes away and then suddenly there's a power vacuum.
Yeah,
I
or-
presume that
is-
they said another faction, it wasn't Chiang Kai-shek, it was someone more capable, let's say, as a leadership material.
It's just the only reason why this is gonna get a little bit more monopolitical, but just the only reason why Taiwan became more democratic is quite literally the fact that Chiang Kai-shek died, and there was enough nation building in Taiwan at the time to actually develop a democratic system to come afterwards. Like, Taiwan didn't get its democratic system until well into the 80s, kind of like how Korea did. And you could technically see that repeat in if the nationalists won the Civil War, or you could just see an even bigger mess where the Chinese Civil War continues on in a separate stage of even more people just splitting it up and fighting, or just grabbing more power.
Or it just gets stuck in a Congo situation of a perpetual low-level civil war.
That could very much happen. It could retain itself in a warlord mode and just go on for hundreds of years, as history has proven.
It could be intriguing to watch, but not nice for the people involved.
No, it would not. Eventually something will prevail and China will become whole again, and just sort of there would actually be breathing time for the nation to actually start nation building.
Yes.
But until then, you don't know what would occur before that occurs. That's the entire issue with trying to understand China. The weird things that has occurred before could occur again, or something that nobody has ever thought of would occur I mean, think about it. It's a country that's somehow tore itself because someone said, "I'm the brother of Jesus."
Yeah. Taiping Rebellion.
I don't think anyone saw that coming from.
Yeah, Taiping Rebellion. Good times. Good times.
Exactly.
It was not
It's
for
just-
China.
This is just
It's
the
one of the most
problem with
destructive
China.
wars in human history, Fleet.
20 million perish.
Oh,
YouTube-
because someone
YouTube,
proclaims to be
YouTube-
the brother of Jesus.
YouTube Minecraft Watcher asks, what if in 1940 the American army, after seeing the Blitz, decides to reuse the USN's 5-inch 38 as an AT gun? By the Blitz,
yes.
do you mean Blitzkrieg? I'm going to assume you mean Blitzkrieg because you're talking about using a 5-inch 38 as an AT gun. That's massive overkill. That is aggressively huge overkill.
Yeah.
That is an
Like-
that is an unnecessary level of overkill.
Considering, right, you're fighting Panzer
It's-
1s and 2s?
And even if you fight in 3s and 4s, no Panzer
That's
at this
still...
point at this point carries armor thicker than 50mm on the front.
I like it though.
The only thing
Why not?
The
Like it
materials
is
are
overkill.
5-inch
70 mil.
Yeah, that's
The
why I
only-
said Panzer.
The
didn't
only
say
thing a 5-inch 38 the U.S. Army would even consider for it to do in 1940 would probably be a division level support artillery piece,
Yeah.
or maybe they might go down to regimental. It's small enough for that, but like it is going to be a high organizational level unit to support the smaller units. You will never use anything that big as an anti-tank gun. It's not even considered. Like, if you think about it, like the Germans were using the 88s, and that is a divisional level asset.
Like,
A 5-inch 38 is not going to ever be distributed in like a company level as an anti-tank gun. It's too big.
I mean, the only times you would see that is in the late war Soviet army. Guns of that size is dedicated to anti-tank guns.
And to be fair, that's only occurring in like 42, 43 at limited level. The Soviets didn't really fully switch to like 100 mil or 122 anti-tank gun until like in the, well into the post-war era, simply because that's what you need to bust a tank. But in the 1940s, you don't need anything that size to bust a tank.
Yeah.
It will be helpful to use as a bunker buster, but to be fair, that's just... Now you're just getting into, like, artillery pieces. And that's technically what it is. It's an artillery piece.
Yeah.
It will probably function pretty decently as an indirect fire weapon.
Indeed.
But using it as a direct fire, it's too big to
Overkill.
hide, and it's complete overkill. Yeah. On the other hand, it would be funny to use that as, or get some time fuse shell and just use that as a combination of artillery and anti-air unit. It would be funny, but
Knight, what are you... Knight, I just looked over at YouTube chat for a second. Yep, okay, so he says that USS Enterprise CV6 was a situation that by all rights she should never been allowed to get into in the first place. Well, it's not like the US really had a choice, Knight.
what does he mean by situation that it should never be in?
Being the sole US carrier for a bit.
That's okay.
And apparently, ideally, none of the US carriers should have found themselves in CV6 position, and it was partially because of the huge carrier losses that the US had to borrow victorious. Yes, it is all true, Knight, but it's not like the US threw carriers at problems and just watched them all die. That's not what happened at all.
It's like,
Come on, Knight.
Sorry.
Knight,
It's
you know
like
better
war-
than this. You know better than
War
this,
has
Knight. Come on.
War creates
Be better.
casualties, and if a carrier becomes a casualty, it becomes a casualty.
Come on,
You
Knight.
can't.
it's like, okay, hey, you can argue, Knight, that only on the tactical level. They did make some fucking wookies with their carriers that led to Enterprise being in bad situations, or just not being there when it was needed. That we can probably agree on. But her being the only carrier, can't blame the Americans.
You just gotta applaud the Japanese for doing a good job at sinking all the other carriers,
Yeah.
or just putting them out of commissions.
Yeah, like the blows at Santa Cruz and the fights around Guadalcanal.
It was a rough fight.
Midway.
Both sides are working up their carrier battle doctrines, and
Like,
the
it
Japanese
was-
had the advantage of having a better developed doctrine at the time.
I mean, had things been
And
different, it could have been Hornet that could have been left rather than Enterprise. It was just circumstance that happened. I mean, and also yes,
And like technically,
and also to be fair, the USN didn't have to borrow Victorious. They just chose to because it was strategically a good idea to have two fleet carriers.
In the
Saratoga-
nicest way, if King hadn't thought it was absolutely frigging necessary, he'd have never done it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wouldn't say it's chose. It is a necessary thing to do. And remember, he did choose that over the option of moving Ranger.
Yeah, which is, well, that's a fair comment, isn't it? Everyone knows Ranger's not really set up for the Pacific War as it was being waged.
Yeah, so in nicest way, the fact that King goes from, I don't want the British anywhere near here because I want it to be an American, so America dominates this, to, we need an extra carrier. I am America's champion of naval aviation. I have literally been championing it ever since Moffat died. And as much as I love Ranger, no, I'm going to have to go to the British for one of their carriers.
The lack of the torpedo magazine basically is what dooms Ranger, because the full triad is what you need in the Pacific at this point, as well as a lack of survivability. It's a 1-2 punch.
to be fair, no one could really blame Ranger for being Ranger. Ranger's Ranger because nobody knew how to build a.
They had an idea.
Yes,
Yeah.
the bright idea
Yeah,
fairly
yeah.
presented, and no one had the shotgun ready. Oh,
Keep
I
the
like-
shotgun ready.
I like that analogy.
You-
Alex, we've got to put that. Alex, ship-shaped T-shirt. We've got to put that on a ship-shaped T-shirt. Ship-shape. Keep a shotgun handy for the good idea fairy. Put that on a T-shirt.
The bright idea fairy.
The bright
Be careful.
idea
The good
fairy.
idea fairy is a different creature. It's a very nice being, but it turns up far less often. Bright idea fairy comes in the room, pick up the shotgun. Bright idea fairy turns to you, cock the shotgun.
And
Bright
on-
idea start talking, fire.
Yeah. And on that marvelous little detail of how to deal with bright idea fairies, we have come to the end of this week's ramblings. Now, there will be a catch-up ramblings. We've still got some questions to work through. So look out for that on Friday. There's nothing to get in its way this Friday, as far as I'm aware, but if anything changes, I'll obviously let people know in advance. I'm going to try and be more upbeat with my announcements and pronouncements. I am actually in the process of beginning to work up a big rework of how I'm doing things on the channel. That's probably going to take me about a month to work out in my head and then write some plans down. So look out for that. All the currently running series will finish as I want them to. And then, obviously, we'll have the reworked channel and streaming going out in a different way. So look out for all that. But I just wanted to announce it now to let you know things are in the works. Take care, everybody. Thank you all the panel for being here. Thank you, Foxo. Thank you, Dr. Alex Clark. Thank you, James. Always a pleasure to have James here. Thank you, Dragon. Thank you, Moe. Thank you, The Guy, also known as The Dutchman. And thank you, Ruinon, for being here, as always, our friendly neighborhood Sparky. Take care, everyone.